Jon Snow stood upon the ramparts of Winterfell, cloaked in the chill of the northern wind. The ghosts of battles past lingered in every breath of air, a whisper of memory that seemed to swirl around him as if to remind him of all that had been lost, and all that could yet be won. He had once believed his duty ended when the Night King fell. The promise he made of protecting the living from the dead had guided him through unspeakable horrors. Yet as he gazed out across the snow-covered fields, he sensed that another path had unfolded before him, one that carried the weight of a different destiny. The realm was fractured. War had severed the ties between the 7 kingdoms, turned brother against brother and father against son. Grief weighed upon the land like a thick and oppressive fog, and the ghosts of the fallen demanded justice. Looking south in his mind's eye, Jon saw the devastation wrought by warring lords and queens. He saw the fields burned and fields sown with salt, the starving peasants, the proud knights turned bandits. And he knew that if he returned to the solitary isolation he had once craved, Westeros might never heal. The world bled, and there was no peace to be found in inaction. Tormund Giantsbane came up beside him, red hair whipped by the wind, his broad face ruddy from the chill. The wildling's eyes narrowed on Jon as if seeking the truth behind whatever storms brewed within him. Jon offered a faint nod, acknowledging his friend without speaking. He could hear Tormund's concerns in that silent glance. Concerns for the future of the free folk, concerns for the future of the 7 kingdoms, and for Jon himself. Once, Jon had crossed the wall to broker peace between enemies of centuries, and that gesture had cost him dearly. But in that union he found a glimpse of something else, hope that old hatreds could dissolve in the face of necessity, and that where once only blood was spilt, a new seed of unity might be planted. The war with the Night King had ended at tremendous cost. Daenerys Targaryen had unleashed her dragons, scorching the undead to ashes with dragonfire, and paying for it with the charred bones of the creatures she so loved. Rhaegal and Drogon, her magnificent beasts, had thundered across the sky in a final stand. Ultimately, Rhaegal perished in the fray, while Drogon survived, battered but alive. The battle had been cataclysmic, a dance of ice and fire that left Winterfell in ruins, and the entire realm reeling. Daenerys herself, consumed by her own sense of divine right and wounded by betrayals, both real and imagined, had taken her army south to claim the Iron Throne. But the people's distrust, the swirling conspiracies, the heartbreak over her losses, and the final betrayal by those who once supported her had driven her down a dark path. When she raised King's Landing, the realm finally recognized the madness that had seized the last Targaryen queen. In the city's ashes and in the broken faces of its survivors, the dream of a just and compassionate rule died. Jon's role in stopping Daenerys had been as brutal as it was necessary. He had struck her down, tears in his eyes, and laid her body to rest amidst the rubble of her final conquest. Drogon flew off with her remains in despair, leaving behind only the legend of the Targaryen name and the uncertain, fractious kingdom she had left half in ruin. Bran Stark had ascended as king by consensus, if only to try to guide a shattered realm toward some semblance of peace. Yet, the crown's influence was tenuous. The North had declared itself independent under Sansa Stark. The Iron Islands squabbled over who truly ruled them. The Reach was in upheaval after the deaths of House Tyrell's main line, and Dorne remained as aloof and unbending as ever. The Riverlands simmered with resentment. The Stormlands lacked a coherent leader since House Baratheon's extinction. The Westerlands had grown bitter behind the walls of Casterly Rock. Every corner of Westeros cried out for stable leadership but found none. Even Bran's mystical sight could not quell the chaos quickly, as the young king's style of rule was distant and ethereal, almost too resigned to the illusions of time. Thus, the realm was left to fester, and Jon found himself torn between his desire to escape the burdens of politics and the knowledge that running would only perpetuate the cycle of violence. He learned through ravens and rumors of petty lords seizing vulnerable lands, of lords from the Vale threatening to withhold grain unless given more influence, of the Ironborn raiding coasts to take what they claimed they were owed. The house that once bore the three-headed dragon had left a legacy of bloodshed, but also of might and awe. If the Targaryen name could be harnessed for unity rather than destruction, perhaps the realm could be saved. Yet Jon wanted no throne. He had never desired to be king, nor believed himself worthy of it. But leadership is often thrust upon the reluctant, and once more, Destiny whispered in his ear, carried on the cold wind of the north. It was Samwell Tarly who first suggested the idea in earnest. A letter arrived at Winterfell one crisp morning, delivered by the hand of a Night's Watch ranger who had come from the citadel. The parchment spoke of the discovery of an ancient text that recounted the forging of old alliances. Sam wrote about how Aegon the Conqueror had once united the 7 kingdoms under the might of dragons, but how that unity, forged by fire, was never truly tempered by compassion. Sam proposed that perhaps in the aftermath of so much devastation, Westeros needed that spark once more, but guided by a gentler hand. Perhaps, Sam wrote in the neat lines of his carefully chosen words, Jon could be the king the people needed, the king who would stand not above them but beside them. Jon nearly dismissed the idea as madness. But over the following weeks, Tormund's good-natured teasing, Arya's cryptic encouragement, and Sansa's urgent pleas made him reconsider. The final push came from Ghost, his direwolf, who stood at his side faithfully, as if sensing Jon's hidden turmoil and urging him forward with unwavering loyalty. In the quiet of the night, Jon wondered if everything that had happened, the revelations of his Targaryen blood, the battles for the realm's survival, had all been pushing him toward this singular moment. He sent ravens to gather old allies, those who had stood by him in the Great War, who had seen his willingness to lay down his life for the realm, might still harbor enough trust in him to answer the call. If the 7 kingdoms were to be mended, it would start with those who still believed in the possibility of a united peace. Slowly, they trickled in. Houses great and small, Manderley from White Harbor, Glover from Deepwood Motte, Royce from the Vale, Tarly from the Reach, and more. Even the Iron Islands sent an emissary, though she arrived with measured wariness. They gathered in Winterfell's great hall, once again rebuilt from the ashes of war. Fires crackled in the hearths, but a solemn hush fell over them as Jon rose to speak. He remembered the lessons of his father, or the man he once believed was his father, Ned Stark. Speak the truth, even if it costs you. Jon laid bare his lineage, Aegon Targaryen, son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark. He expressed neither pride nor ambition in that name. Instead, he confessed that it had brought him only pain and guilt for how it came into the open, for how Daenerys had spiraled into fear and mistrust. But he could not deny that his blood gave him a claim that might unite the realm, or at least give people a reason to pause and listen. He did not ask them to call him king. Rather, he proposed a council, an assembly of the realm's lords and ladies who could oversee the rebuilding of Westeros, guided by the principle that unity was paramount. House Stark stood behind him. Arya's hawk-like gaze swept over every face, daring them to doubt her brother's sincerity. Sansa's reputation as the Lady of Winterfell lent further gravitas to his words. Slowly, the hall began to stir with cautious acceptance, for each had lost much in the wars of the past decade, and saw the realm teetering on the brink once more. Yet, talk of uniting the 7 kingdoms under a Targaryen banner resurrected old fears. The memory of King's Landing in flames lay fresh in every mind. Many would have fled or outright refused if not for the quiet conviction in Jon's eyes. They remembered him at the Battle of the Bastards, facing impossible odds to reclaim Winterfell from Ramsay Bolton. They remembered him riding north of the Wall to capture a White, risking his life to prove the undead threat was real. And they knew he had stabbed the woman he loved to prevent further carnage. Whatever else he was, Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen, was not driven by hunger for power. When the meeting ended, some left with murmured pledges of support, others with ambivalent stares. Jon felt the enormity of the undertaking weigh upon his shoulders. He was no conqueror. He had no dragons to bend the realm's knees. His only weapons were truth, honor, and the loyalty he had earned. Yet, as Samwell wrote in another letter soon after, perhaps those were the very things the realm needed now, after so many lies and betrayals. Jon's next steps would be to call upon each kingdom in turn, to meet with its lords, and to forge an alliance not bound by fear but by necessity and hope. It began in the north, where Jon had the surest footing. Sansa, Lady of Winterfell, had declared the North's independence under her rule when Bran ascended. Now she stood beside Jon to reaffirm that the North would follow him if he sought to unite Westeros in peace. She told him privately that her reasons were as pragmatic as they were fraternal. The North had been ravaged by endless wars, from Robb Stark's campaign to the final battle against the Night King. Food stores ran low, the people were tired, and winter still lingered with an icy grip. If the North remained isolated, trade and resources would be scarce. A united Westeros, one that welcomed cooperation rather than demanded it, might restore the North's strength. From Winterfell, Jon traveled to the Vale. The Erie's gates, perched high in the mountains, were as cold and forbidding as the stony hearts of its regents. But Lord Royce, a man of iron loyalty, remembered Jon's valor on the battlefield. He agreed to host a grand feast in Jon's honor, if only to hear him out. The Vale had lost Lord Robin Arryn in a bloody coup led by discontented nobles, who believed the Arryn line too feeble and cursed. Now, Royce governed as regent while the Vale's lords squabbled over who might best inherit the seat of power. Jon addressed them all, speaking of the shattered alliances and the looming threat of anarchy if the kingdom remained fractured. He spoke of building roads that connected the Vale to the north, ensuring goods and knowledge could flow freely. Though the lords of the Vale were cautious, Lord Royce's endorsement tipped the scale. They agreed to send their men to a convocation of lords that Jon hoped to hold in the Riverlands. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Across the Trident, tensions ran high. The Riverlands had been the stage for countless invasions, from the War of the Five Kings to the raids by the undead, to the various rebel groups that had sprung up like weeds in the absence of a strong central power. House Tully's fortunes had waned since the death of Hoster Tully and the imprisonment of Edmure Tully. Edmure, released during the final days of the wars, now sought to rebuild Riverrun, but faced pushback from lesser lords who questioned his competence. Arya Stark accompanied Jon on this journey, partly to see the land where her mother's family had ruled, partly to ensure he had someone watching his back. They arrived at Riverrun to find the castle walls in a state of disrepair, the people hungry and suspicious. Edmure Tully greeted them with relief, for he had few allies left. Arya's presence ensured a measure of trust, and Jon's sincerity began to melt the frost of mistrust that hung over every conversation. In one of the battered halls of Riverrun, Jon convened a gathering of local lords and leaders. He spoke plainly, without the grand oratory of a typical kingly figure. He acknowledged the Riverlands had suffered the most from constant passage of armies, and needed assurance that any unification plan would protect them. He promised open trade routes, guaranteed shipments of food from the Vale and the North, and a system to ensure disputes were handled by a fair, realm-wide tribunal rather than through endless feuds. Some balked. They wondered how Jon Snow, or Aegon Targaryen, could guarantee fairness when Targaryens had historically ruled with an iron fist. But Edmure, with Arya's unwavering gaze at his side, vouched for Jon's compassion. The memory of how Jon had negotiated with the wildlings to avert bloodshed lent credence to the idea he could broker peace among the lords of the Riverlands. By the end of a tense week, the Riverlands had not fully pledged fealty, but they had agreed to attend the convocation Jon wanted to hold in King's Landing, if he could secure the city for such a gathering. King's Landing loomed as a ruinous scar on the landscape, still reeling from Daenerys' dragonfire. Many of its buildings remained in rubble, the Red Keep partially collapsed, and the Great Sept's remnants a haunting echo of the wildfire explosion that once destroyed it. Bran's seat in the city was more symbolic than practical. The real power lay in the lords who controlled the flow of supplies and the distribution of coin. Into this volatile environment Jon rode, accompanied by a small retinue. It felt like returning to the site of a nightmare he could never quite outrun. Everywhere he looked, he saw the ghosts of Daenerys' final descent into madness, saw the innocents fleeing the dragon's wrath, heard the bells that tolled for mercy and were ignored. He remembered the dreadful moment he had to plunge a dagger into the heart of the only woman he had ever truly loved in that way. Bran Stark met him in the ruined throne room. King Bran, as the realm called him, though many used the title hesitantly, sat not on the Iron Throne, but in a carved wooden chair that had been dragged in from some lesser hall. Jon noted the dull emptiness in Bran's once warm eyes. The powers of the three-eyed raven had transformed his brother into something beyond mortal concerns, and though Bran recognized Jon, it was as if he regarded him from a great distance. Bran listened quietly as Jon explained his proposal, a grand summit of lords from every corner of Westeros, to be held in King's Landing under the king's protection, for the purpose of forging a new pact of unity. Bran blinked once, then said in his gentle, emotionless tone, "This is the path you must take, Jon. I have seen it." He offered no more details, no predictions of success or failure. His endorsement was as cryptic as the rest of his rule, yet it was enough to grant Jon authority to invite the lords and ladies to the capital. Over the next month, ravens flew to the Westerlands, the Reach, the Stormlands, Dorne, and the Iron Islands. Jon's envoys, men and women who believed in his cause, rode tirelessly. The city readied itself as best it could for a gathering not seen since Aegon the Conqueror's time. Even Tyrion Lannister, once hand of the Queen to Daenerys, emerged from the shadows to lend his advice. He had been living in quiet disgrace, tormented by his failures. Yet, he believed in Jon's nature, and he wanted redemption by aiding in any form of peace that might be won. The notion that a Targaryen could once again preside over a unified Westeros brought back his own memories, some hopeful, some bitter. But he stood by Jon, determined to guide him away from the mistakes of past rulers. Perhaps in forging a better realm, Tyrion could atone for the terrible choices that led to so much death. The first to arrive were the Westerlands. Sir Duffon Lannister, a distant cousin to Tyrion, led a retinue of knights to represent the fractured house. Cersei and Jaime were gone, the Lannister line in tatters, so distant branches competed for the right to claim Casterly Rock. Sir Davon, a pragmatic man who had witnessed the toll of the last wars, agreed that unity would serve them better than isolation. He settled in the charred remains of the city, uneasy about the gathering, but determined to see if there was any real chance for stability. Next came the Lords of the Reach, led by the newly risen House Merryweather, allied with what was left of House Tarly. Sam had renounced his claim to Horn Hill to remain a maester, but he guided his relatives to see the benefit of Jon's proposal, highlighting the long agricultural traditions of the Reach that could once again feed Westeros if secure trade routes and fair governance were ensured. The Stormlands were trickier. Gendry Baratheon, legitimized by Queen Daenerys in her final days, was a blacksmith's son with a king's name. He had never fully claimed the Stormlands, beset by rivals who scoffed at a bastard's ascent, but he had held Storm's End through skill, the loyalty of those who believed in him, and a measure of luck. Gendry arrived with a small force, determined to keep the seed of his forefathers alive. He and Jon exchanged a warm greeting, recalling their days fighting side by side. Gendry was open to talk of unification, if only because the Stormlands needed allies to maintain its defenses and to rebuild its battered holdfasts. From Dorne came Illyria Sand's successors, a coalition of minor lords and ladies who had seized power in the vacuum after the Martell line was extinguished. They arrived with a flourish of bright silks, determined not to be overshadowed by the illusions of Targaryen grandeur. The Dornish were proud as ever and insisted that any notion of uniting under a Targaryen banner required an acknowledgement of Dorne's sovereignty and distinct culture. Jon offered them mutual respect and an invitation to shape the new realm's laws in ways that addressed historical Dornish grievances. It was enough to keep them at the table, though their arrogance simmered beneath the surface. Finally, the Iron Islands delegation arrived, led by Yara Greyjoy herself. She had taken command after Theon's death, determined to carve out a place for the Ironborn in this new age. Yara made it plain that if Jon wanted her people to abandon raiding, he would need to grant them wide autonomy and ensure their prosperity through fair trade. She recognized Jon Snow as a warrior worthy of respect, if not as a king to kneel before. Yet, she had lost faith in proud monarchs who promised everything and delivered little. The conversation would be challenging, but Yara came because she had once fought alongside Jon in the final stand against the dead, and because she believed, albeit dimly, in a future where the Ironborn did not need to pillage to survive. With all parties gathered, King's Landing became a crucible of tension and possibility. Jon took up temporary residence in the Red Keep's less damaged wing, assisted by Tyrion, Davos Seaworth, and Missandei, who had miraculously survived by being absent from the city during Daenerys' final assault, and later found refuge among loyal Targaryen supporters. Each day, lords and ladies convened in the refurbished throne room. The Iron Throne itself stood twisted and half-melted, a haunting reminder of Dragonfire's fury. Many believed it was a fitting symbol of the futility of centralized absolute power. Jon refused to seat himself upon it, preferring to address the assembly on equal footing. He insisted that any new realm be guided by a council of representatives from each region, ensuring no single kingdom's voice drowned out the rest. He proposed charters guaranteeing local governance, open trade, shared laws, and a system of justice that drew upon the best minds from Old Town, from the maesters, and from the combined wisdom of the lords themselves. Debate raged for weeks. Swords were drawn more than once. Harsh words flew. Dorne demanded certain rights that clashed with the Vale's demands. The Iron Islands insisted on a broad measure of independence that unsettled the Riverlands, who had suffered Ironborn raids for centuries. The Stormlands wanted guarantees that House Baratheon, or Gendry, would remain recognized as legitimate. The Westerlands sought confirmation that the Lannister name wouldn't be stripped of its lands in retribution for the atrocities under Cersei's rule. Through it all, Jon Snow listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, it was with the measured honesty that had become his hallmark. He spoke of the Great War against the dead, of how unity alone secured victory. He reminded them that if the living could stand side by side against a common enemy once, they could do so again, but only if they truly recognized each other's strengths and grievances. In the background, Sansa worked tirelessly, forging alliances with the more pragmatic lords by offering potential trade deals. Arya slipped through the city's back alleys and hidden corridors, listening for whispers of plots against Jon or the new order he tried to create. Davos negotiated quietly with rebellious houses, sharing stories of Stannis Baratheon's downfall and how a rigid, unyielding approach to rule led only to more war. Gendry hammered out details with the Stormland lords, while Tyrion used his silver tongue and insider knowledge to quell the Westerland's fears. Step by step they inched toward an accord. Bran presided from the background, rarely speaking, his expression distant as if peering at events far beyond mortal comprehension. At length, a fragile consensus formed. Each kingdom would pledge its banners to a new confederation of Westeros, with Jon recognized as their figurehead, not as an absolute monarch, but as a paramount ruler who shared power with a council. The Targaryen banner, once a symbol of conquest and subjugation, would become a symbol of unity, but it would be modified. The three-headed dragon would be entwined with the direwolf of House Stark, merging fire and ice. It was a gesture that recognized Jon's dual heritage, a testament that he was both a son of the North and a blood heir of House Targaryen. The assembled lords proposed that King Bran step down gracefully, retiring to a role as the realm's spiritual and mystical guide, a living repository of history who would advise but not rule. After days of private contemplation, Bran agreed, showing neither sadness nor relief, merely the acceptance of someone who foresaw the shape of things long before it happened. When the day came to finalize the pact, Jon stood before the half-melted Iron Throne. The light of dawn poured through the shattered windows. Every lord and lady, from every corner of the realm, gathered in that battered throne room. Jon looked out at them, remembering faces he'd seen in the thick of battle, or across parley tables in times of crisis, or behind fortress walls, grim and unyielding. He thought of how many had died for the realm's petty squabbles, and realized that if this fragile dream of unity did not hold, more death would follow. Then as the sun rose higher, brightening the chamber with a hopeful glow, he knelt before Sansa Stark, who placed a simple crown of forged Valyrian steel and northern iron on his head. It was not the ornate relic the Targaryen kings had once worn, nor the crowned stag of House Baratheon. It was something new, a symbol of forging metal from the scraps of old wars. A symbol of rebirth. The lords roared their acclaim, though some more heartily than others. A hush fell as Jon rose to address them. His voice trembled with the weight of it all, but steadied as he spoke from his heart. He declared that they stood upon the threshold of a new age, one that required them to set aside old hatreds and grudges for the sake of the realm's survival. He vowed not to rule them as a tyrant, nor to govern from fear, but to guide them as a servant of the people. He acknowledged the crimes committed in the Targaryen name, from the Mad King to Daenerys' tragic final act. He acknowledged the Starks who had fought for independence. He acknowledged each kingdom's storied history, its pride, and its desire for self-governance. And he promised that this union would not be a prison, but a bulwark against the chaos that had consumed them for too long. There was no single moment of rapturous unanimity. Instead, it was a gradual acceptance, a cautious alignment of interests that had once collided like colliding swords. The convocation ended with the signing of charters, sealed by wax and oath. The Seven Kingdoms, and the North, now recognized as an integral yet distinctly respected component, were united again under the banner of the dragon, entwined with the direwolf. The city erupted into a subdued form of celebration, more out of relief than triumph, for the people of King's Landing had witnessed enough triumphs to fill 1,000 lifetimes. Yet, in the taverns, small folk raised cups to the king who knelt, as some called Jon, referencing the moment he knelt to Sansa to be crowned. Others called him Jon the White Wolf, blending his northern roots with Targaryen lineage, a symbol of bridging two worlds. Though the crown now weighed upon Jon's head, the real work began immediately. The city still lay in rubble, and its people starved. Tyrion and Davos joined forces to oversee reconstruction efforts. Grain from the Reach began to flow, replenishing King's Landing's markets. The North sent shipments of lumber, the Westerlands contributed gold, and the Vale offered stone and skilled stonemasons. Dornish engineers lent their expertise to improving irrigation and water channels, while the Iron Islands, ironically, provided ships to transport goods swiftly along the coasts. Each kingdom, eager to prove its commitment or to earn favor, pitched in. Jon spent his days walking among the ruined streets, accompanied by the Kingsguard, who were not the gilded knights of old, but an assembly of the realm's finest from different regions, each knighted for valor. He spoke with beggars and shopkeepers alike, listening to their stories. He ordered that the Red Keep open its stores to feed the hungry, knowing that any new monarchy would fail if it did not address the suffering of the common folk. Missandei helped him draft new edicts emphasizing accountability, punishing corruption. The city guard, once a hotbed of bribes and cruelty, was restructured under men and women chosen for their proven sense of duty rather than family connections. Of course, there were pockets of dissent. Some believed the Targaryen Stark King was simply another conqueror who would eventually reveal a tyrant's face. Others plotted in secret, lords who felt they were not granted enough influence or who believed their bloodlines had a better claim. Jon's agents, led by Arya's network of informants, rooted out conspiracies, sometimes resorting to swift justice to quell them before they spark. The realm's newly assembled council aimed to address grievances fairly, but it was a constant balancing act. Gendry wrestled with lords in the Stormlands who resented a bastard's hold on Storm's End. Yara had to keep her Ironborn reined in, punishing those who turned to old ways of raiding. The lords of the Westerlands, distrustful of Tyrion, tested the new administration's resolve by withholding gold until certain demands were met. Yet, each challenge was met with negotiation or firm action, ensuring the realm did not fracture anew. Months turned into a year, and the scars of war began to fade, at least in the capital. Slowly, the novelty of a new king gave way to the grind of governance. Jon found it as draining as any battle. At least in war, one knew the enemy stood before you, clear and stark. In peace, threats lurked behind smiles and handshakes. Nonetheless, the realm began to mend. Roads were repaired, and trade caravans once again ventured safely from the Arbor to the Neck. Harvest festivals were held without fear of raids, and the small folk whispered that, for the first time in memory, a king seemed to care about their plight. Jon's crowning achievement, and the greatest test of unity, came in his plan to expand the network of roads and build new ports, forging a cohesive system that spanned all corners of Westeros. He called upon skilled builders from Pentos, Bravos, and even Volantis, forging trade agreements with Essos to bring new architectural innovations. Dockyards were established near the Blackwater, the Iron Islands built advanced longships for safer maritime routes, and the North contributed unstoppable grit to laying highways through harsh terrain. Each kingdom received a share of the profits from increased commerce, encouraging them to maintain the roads and keep bandits at bay. The synergy of cooperation proved that the realm thrived when united, rather than divided. During this period, Drogon returned, a sight that both awed and unsettled the realm. The great black dragon soared over King's Landing one dawn, casting a massive shadow that sent city folk into terrified chaos. Jon stood on the battlements, heart pounding. Part of him wondered if Drogon had come seeking vengeance for Daenerys' death. But the beast simply circled the city, screeching a haunting lament, then landed near the Red Keep's collapsed dome. Jon approached with cautious reverence, recalling his days riding Rhaegal. He did not attempt to mount Drogon, nor did he brandish a weapon. Instead, he extended a hand. Drogon hissed, snorted plumes of smoke, and then turned away, as though deciding he had nothing left to burn or to prove. He took to the skies again and vanished. But the message was clear. The last living dragon had not abandoned Westeros. Perhaps he watched from distant mountains, reminding the world of the cataclysmic power that once shaped the realm. Word spread like wildfire. The dragon had returned. Many took it as an omen, a final acknowledgement that the Targaryen line endured through June. Some whispered that if he could tame Drogon, his authority would be absolute. Others feared the day the dragon might return in wrath. Yet, Jon refused to pursue Drogon, refusing to force the creature into service. He proclaimed dragons should never again be used as tools of conquest, for it was the unchecked power of dragons that led to so many tragedies. This garnered both admiration and unease, but it was one more piece in the tapestry of Jon's reign. A refusal to bend others, even beasts of myth, to his will through fear. Still, the question remained whether the unity would hold beyond the transitional years. Jon recognized that sustaining a united Westeros meant more than centralized power. It required cultural exchange, mutual respect, shared prosperity, and a common identity. Thus, he sponsored tourneys that brought knights from Dorne to the north, archers from the Reach to the Vale, and reavers from the Iron Islands to test their mettle in non-lethal contests. He encouraged the faiths, both the Seven and the Old Gods, even the drowned god of the Ironborn, to coexist, establishing a principle of religious tolerance. He summoned the maesters to conduct open forums of knowledge, inviting the small folk to attend if they wished. Slowly, curiosity replaced suspicion in some hearts. Friendships formed across once impassable boundaries. The old resentments didn't vanish, but they softened under the steady glow of cooperation. Sansa returned to Winterfell, content that the North remained safe under her stewardship, but also assured that her brother, now king, would never betray the region's autonomy. Arya, restless as ever, departed on a ship westward, seeking the unknown. Gendry found a place in the Stormlands, forging stronger alliances. Tyrion continued as the hand of the king, determined not to repeat his mistakes under Daenerys. Davos oversaw the expansion of the Royal Navy, ensuring that the waters between the kingdoms were patrolled and safe for trade. Missandei became a chief advisor on Essosi diplomacy, forging relationships that further enriched the realm's coffers and culture. Meanwhile, Yara managed to keep the Ironborn in line, focusing their energies on legitimate seafaring and trade, though occasional skirmishes with holdouts of the old ways persisted. As the second year of Jon's reign concluded, he traveled across Westeros with a modest retinue, stopping in each kingdom to hold open courts. In the Stormlands, he sat beneath the ancient walls of Storm's End, listening to peasants describe the devastation of storms that had battered their livelihoods. He promised aid in rebuilding their piers and fisheries. In Dorne, under the scorching sun of Sunspear, he discussed water distribution and promised fair representation for Dornish lords in the Central Council. The pale sands of Dorne contrasted starkly with the snowy slopes of the north, yet he felt no barrier in hearing their concerns. In the Reach, he walked the orchard-laden roads near Highgarden, seeing how the region's bounty could once again feed the realm. In the Westerlands, he paid respects at the ruins of the Sept of Beller's gold mines, where conditions had once been brutal, ordering improved oversight for miners. Throughout these travels he faced varied receptions, but the people marveled that a king came in person, not with a retinue of armed threats, but with an ear ready to listen. It was perhaps a small gesture in the grand scheme, but for many small folk, it was the first time in memory that the monarchy felt not like a distant or oppressive force, but like a presence that might actually care. That is not to say all was harmonious. Jon weathered assassination attempts, some orchestrated by shadowy remnants of the Golden Company, still bitter over Daenerys' demise. He learned of lords who clandestinely armed private militias, perhaps waiting for the first sign of weakness to rebel. Outside forces, such as the Free Cities, tested Westeros' resolve by encouraging piracy on the Narrow Sea. Each challenge demanded a delicate blend of diplomacy and force. Jon answered them as best he could, trusting Tyrion's counsel and leaning on the loyal friendships he had forged. The realm's unity proved resilient, but not invulnerable. Jon learned to accept that no reign could be without turmoil, that power inevitably drew darkness to its edges. Yet, he held fast to his principles, never allowing himself to become a tyrant, nor to waver in his commitment to a fair resolution of conflicts. Near the close of the 3rd year, whispers of new beginnings graced the halls of power. Houses that had once borne centuries of enmity began discussing marriages to cement alliances. The next generation of heirs, having grown up in relative stability, showed interest in forging bonds rather than resurrecting feuds. Some of the older lords grumbled that the young were forgetting their heritage, but Jon believed they were forging a better one. The new roads teemed with travelers who carried tales of each region's splendor. Dornish wines found fans in the north, while the Westerland's fine fabrics were sought in the Iron Islands. Ideas flowed as freely as goods, sparking a subtle cultural renaissance. Minstrels sang ballads of the war for the dawn, of the wolf and the dragon, capturing the hearts of the small folk who yearned for legends that united, rather than divided. Amid these developments, the time came for Jon Snow to address a lingering question: his own heir. He had no children, no queen by his side. Rumors abounded of potential matches, from Margaery Tyrell's distant cousin to Dornish princesses. But Jon remained wary, haunted by the ghosts of love lost, especially Daenerys. Tyrion urged him to consider it strategically, for the realm needed stability. Jon, however, believed forcing a marriage for political convenience would only mirror the mistakes of past dynasties. He vowed to wait for a union born of genuine trust and respect, if it came at all. In the meantime, he decreed that should he die heirless, the council would elect the next ruler, a measure that simultaneously checked his power and reassured the lords that no child of his would inherit the throne without broad acceptance. In the 4th year, a letter arrived from beyond the seas. The new Prince of Dorne's envoy had brokered a potential trade pact with the Summer Isles, fostering more wealth for Westeros. The realm's coffers began to swell, and Jon ordered that a portion of the surplus be used to construct schools in every major city, open to children of all classes, a radical notion that earned him both praise and criticism. The Faith of the Seven declared it an affront that lowborn could learn letters alongside highborn. But in time, the new wave of knowledge began to bear fruit. Farmers learned improved techniques, crafters adopted advanced methods, and the maesters oversaw a flourishing of local scholarship. As the realm's general prosperity rose, more found reason to support the new monarchy, or at least not to challenge it. Yet not all accepted progress willingly. In the 5th year, a rebellion sparked in the mountainous regions of the Westerlands. A band of disgruntled lesser lords, feeling sidelined by Ser Davon Lannister's influence, rallied under the cry of true Lannister blood for the Rock. They refused to acknowledge Jon's chosen castellan in Casterly Rock, claiming the Targaryen Stark monarchy was illegitimate. Jon rode out with a combined force of Northmen, Vale Knights, and even some Dornish cavalry, demonstrating the realm's unity in action. The rebellious lords, expecting an internal power struggle, were shocked to see knights from across the kingdom arriving in unison. A brief campaign ensued, culminating in a swift siege that ended when the rebel leaders surrendered. Jon pardoned the rank-and-file soldiers, punishing only the ringleaders with exile. This mercy, echoing Ned Stark's sense of justice, resonated throughout Westeros. Some criticized him for being too lenient, but most recognized the gesture as a step away from the cycles of vengeance that once engulfed the realm. By the 6th year, the roads connecting the far corners of Westeros were more than symbolic lines on a map. They were lifelines. Trade thrived, and so did dialogue between once isolated peoples. The Iron Islands had become a hub of maritime commerce, while the Vale's once insular population saw an influx of foreign goods and ideas. King's Landing, rebuilt with better urban planning, was no longer a labyrinth of impoverished slums and aristocratic spires, but a more balanced city, though still prone to the typical ailments of a metropolis. The Red Keep's silhouette, partially reconstructed yet deliberately not restored to its full domineering form, epitomized the monarchy's new approach, imposing when it needed to be, but not overshadowing the realm with threat. Jon often reflected on the path that brought him here. He wondered what his father, his true father Rhaegar Targaryen, would have thought of a realm united not by dragonfire, but by compromise and cooperation. He wondered if Lyanna Stark would be proud of him for forging peace rather than continuing vendettas. He thought of Daenerys often, sometimes in the dead of night, haunted by the memory of her final breath. Would she have embraced this gentler approach, or would the madness that took root in her have grown regardless? In these moments, his heart felt heavy, but he also felt a strange sense of fulfillment. He had broken the cycle, or at least bent it to a more merciful shape. As the 7th year dawned, a great festival was planned. The realm had endured a stable peace longer than anyone in recent memory could recall. A grand tourney was organized near Harrenhal, that ancient castle so synonymous with curses and defeats. Jon decided that reclaiming Harrenhal's dark legacy for a celebration might be the final symbol of how far they had come. Lords and knights, ladies and commoners arrived from every region. The stands filled with banners of the 7 kingdoms, all flying side by side. The Falcon of the Vale, the Lion of the Westerlands, the Rose of the Reach, the Sun Spear of Dorne, the Kraken of the Iron Islands, the Crowned Stag of the Stormlands, and the Deer Wolf of the North. Above them all, at the King's Box, fluttered the newly designed Targaryen Stark sigil, the direwolf and dragon entwined. The jousts and melees lasted for days. Soldiers who once faced each other in bitter conflict now competed in good-natured rivalry. Even Yara Greyjoy entered a sword-fighting exhibition, besting numerous knights before finally losing to Brienne of Tarth, who had traveled from King's Landing to attend. The small folk cheered as lords from different regions exchanged friendly banter. Dorne's prince bet on a knight from the north while a Stormlands lady pinned her favor on a Dornish champion. It was an image that would have seemed impossible a decade ago. Jon watched from his seat, occasionally smiling, more often pensive. He thought of his siblings, scattered by fate, Sansa in Winterfell, Arya across the seas, Bran in his ethereal realm of visions. He was the last Targaryen, and yet he was also a Stark. Perhaps that duality was what allowed him to stand at the heart of Westeros unity, bridging ice and fire. On the final day of the tourney, Tyrion presided over a joust of champions. Sir Podrick Payne, having grown into a skilled knight, tilted against several worthy opponents. Gendry Baratheon showed off surprising skill on horseback, though he had once been more at home with a smith's hammer than a lance. Laughter and cheers echoed across the expansive field, mingling with the clatter of armor and the neighing of horses. In the stands, children from every region watched with wide-eyed wonder, their minds filling with dreams of knighthood and adventure. These children had not experienced the horrors of the White Walkers or the fractious wars. They were the new generation, growing up in a world that, while not free of strife, was undeniably more hopeful. When the final tilt concluded, Jon rose to address the crowd. The hush that fell over the massive gathering was tinged with genuine respect. He spoke of the realm's journey, how it had come from the brink of annihilation, at the hands of both the undead and its own internal discord, to this moment of shared celebration. He acknowledged the sacrifices of the many who did not live to see this day. He did not declare victory over all evils, nor promise a perfect world. Instead, he reminded them that the peace they enjoyed was fragile, and demanded vigilance and empathy from everyone. He ended by reaffirming his commitment to rule not as a tyrant but as a steward of the realm's well-being. The applause began softly, then swelled into a thunderous roar. Trumpets blared, and for a moment the ancient walls of Harrenhal seemed to resonate with life instead of misery. Jon stood there, a solitary figure in black and red attire, the silver crown resting on his dark curls, and felt an almost overwhelming tide of emotions. He remembered a time when he was a bastard of Winterfell, uncertain of his place in the world. He remembered the moment he took his vows for the Night's Watch, surrendering any claim to family or fortune. He remembered leading wildlings through the wall, speaking truth to lords who refused to acknowledge the threat of the dead. He remembered the heartbreak of King's Landing, the taste of tears and blood in his mouth as he ended Daenerys' life. Now he stood on a stage he never sought, wearing a crown he never desired, yet it felt as though each step of his journey had led him here, to be this bridge between worlds. As the festival wrapped up, the lords and ladies departed, returning to their kingdoms with renewed optimism. Whispers spread that Westeros might have finally broken its centuries-long cycle of violence. Cynics pointed out that humanity's capacity for conflict could never truly be eradicated. But for now, there was peace. And sometimes, peace was enough. Jon lingered at Harrenhal after the crowds had gone, gazing upon the scorched towers that had stood since the age of conquest. Ghost padded beside him, silent as the grave. In the quiet gloom of dusk, Jon found himself at the foot of a massive tower, the setting sun casting long shadows across the courtyard. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Tyrion approach, hobbling slightly on a leg injured years prior. The dwarf regarded Jon with a thoughtful expression and said, "It's strange, isn't it, to think we've come so far? To stand here in a place once cursed by fire and blood and feel only the echoes of triumph, not defeat." Jon nodded, his gaze drifting to the broken spires. "Curses are broken, or forged by men's choices, I suppose." Tyrion's lips twisted into a small smile. "Indeed. It seems we've made a choice to try peace for once." "No, Winterfell." Jon set a hand on Ghost's white fur, the direwolf pressing close to his side. "I only hope it lasts." Tyrion sighed. "Peace never lasts forever, but if we've built something strong enough, it might endure longer than our lifetimes. That, at least, would be a victory." As the final rays of sunlight vanished beyond the fortress walls, Jon felt a gentle sense of fulfillment. He would never be free of the burden of leadership, nor fully cured of the sorrow that clung to him. But he had found a purpose that stretched beyond himself, beyond any personal longing or ambition. The Targaryen banner he bore was no longer solely a symbol of conquest and fire. United with the direwolf, it told a new story, one of family sacrifice and the fragile hope that people could stand together in the face of darkness. And in that story, perhaps, lay the seeds of the realm's salvation. He turned to Tyrion. "Come, let's head back. There's more work to do, and dawn always comes too soon." Tyrion laughed softly, the sound echoing off stone walls that once heard only screams. "Aye, Your Grace. Lead on." They walked back through the courtyard, Ghost padding silently at Jon's side, and the moon rose above Harrenhal's shattered towers. In that pale light, the scars of war seemed softened, transformed into something that told not merely of defeat, but also of the resilience to rebuild. For the first time in a long, bloody history, Westeros had a king who embodied the hopes of both North and South, who understood that true power lay not in dragonfire alone, but in the unity of hearts. And that king was willing to lead so long as the people believed in the dream of a realm, shared by all, that could endure whatever darkness the future might bring. Jon Snow lingered a moment longer amid the ancient stones of Harrenhal, feeling the weight of the night gather around him. A stray breeze slid through the ruined towers, stirring leaves and lifting wisps of dust into the moonlight. Ghost stood at his side, silent and watchful, his red eyes scanning the shadows. At last, Jon turned away from the looming walls and stepped into the courtyard, where Tyrion waited patiently. They began the walk back to their makeshift camp in companionable silence, each consumed by his own thoughts. It struck Jon how different this place felt now, wrapped in the afterglow of a grand festival rather than haunted by curses of old. But he also knew the realm's peace was neither simple nor permanent. He carried the burden of that knowledge with every step. When they reached the firelit circle of tents, his newly formed Kingsguard, drawn from all corners of the realm, bowed as he passed. Jon gave them a small nod, neither encouraging nor dismissing their reverence. He accepted their loyalty but never gloried in it. Stepping inside his tent, he removed the simple crown of iron and Valyrian steel from his head and set it on a low table. A single candle flickered, casting unsteady shadows across a map of Westeros pinned to the rough-hewn wood. In the candlelight, Jon's reflection on the polished steel of the crown looked as if it were someone else's face, forging an unsettling duality between the man he had been, bastard, ranger, sworn brother of the Night's Watch, and the man he was now, king of a realm on the mend. Sleep did not come easily. He lay on a simple cot, an old blanket pulled over him, thinking of the roads ahead. There would be alliances to maintain, new laws to enact, trade agreements to secure, and rebellious embers to keep from flaring. He drifted into uneasy dreams where he stood on the wall, the wind howling with voices calling him both Snow and Targaryen. The shadow of a dragon swept over the ice, its roar echoing in the emptiness. Morning broke to the sound of men striking tents and horses nickering. Jon rose early, washed with cold water, and dressed in practical leathers. He wore the crown only when necessary. He found Tyrion waiting outside, flanked by Sir Podrick Payne and a half-dozen soldiers who had volunteered for service from across the Seven Kingdoms. Tyrion looked as if he too had spent a restless night. Still, the dwarf greeted Jon with a quick grin. "The roads beckon, Your Grace," Tyrion said, half mocking the formal title. Jon nodded. We'll ride for King's Landing, then set out on our next journey. We've lingered here long enough. As they mounted their horses, Jon surveyed the aftermath of the festival. Colorful banners now drooping, still hung from hastily erected stands. Locals who had attended the festivities were busy packing away goods or raking over the trampled ground. The sense of departure hung in the air, underscored by the faint smell of stale ale and extinguished torches. Jon offered them a silent farewell. The lords had already gone, scattering across Westeros to return to their keeps and lands. And with them went the fragile hope that they would carry the spirit of cooperation back home. By mid-morning, the royal party set out from Harrenhal, traveling light. The king's banner, a direwolf entwined with a three-headed dragon, fluttered at the head of the column. Ghosts trotted alongside, sometimes veering off to sniff at the brush. The day was pleasant enough, with the sun filtering through a haze of early autumn clouds. They passed farmland recovering from years of war, fields carefully plowed and sown under the watchful eyes of farmers who only now began to trust that soldiers would not descend upon them to requisition their harvests. Children rushed out to wave or stare with shy curiosity. Jon found himself remembering how differently these roads had looked in the days of the War of the Five Kings. Fields scorched, villages deserted, corpses hanging from trees. The contrasts humbled him. Tyrion rode at his side, fiddling with the reins as if he found them perpetually uncomfortable. "It occurs to me that the festival was a success, though success can be measured in many ways," he remarked. "No one tried to stab you, for one. That's progress. Let's hope it lasts." Jon kept his eyes on the winding road. "We've had smaller attempts before, though none dared to strike so openly." "They might be learning that your realm stands together," Tyrion said. "Never underestimate the deterrent of having men and women from all 7, or 8, kingdoms at your side." Jon glanced over at him. "Perhaps, or they might be biding their time, waiting to see a moment of weakness." "Cynical, but probably wise," Tyrion admitted. "Still, I'll take a bit of optimism where I can get it." The small folk were cheering Jon. The lords and ladies were mingling without flinging daggers or vile insults. "That's more than we could have hoped for even a few years ago." Jon gave a low hum of agreement. Though he tried to cling to the morsels of optimism, the specter of the past, wars and betrayals, reminded him that nothing was forever. He glanced at his assembled riders: Sir Bronston of the Reach with a plumed helmet, Sir Myra Stone of the Vale, sworn to protect him in memory of those who had died for the cause of unity. Half a dozen others, from Dorne to the Westerlands, each chosen for valor and loyalty. Even Missandei rode near the front, wearing riding leathers and a stern expression. She carried dispatches from Essos, forging new trade routes. They were a diverse group, emblematic of the realm Jon strove to hold together. He felt a quiet gratitude for their presence, for the sense that he did not shoulder this task alone. They made steady progress back toward King's Landing. At night, they camped in the open, lighting modest fires and posting guards. One evening, Tyrion produced a skin of Dornish wine to share around the circle. The men and women eased out of their formal roles, swapping stories of their homelands. Sir Bronston described the fragrant roses of Highgarden. Sir Myra recalled the dizzying heights of the Eyrie, and a young squire from the north, barely old enough to shave, spoke of winds so cold they burned the cheeks. Jon contributed his own memories: shivering nights on the wall, hunts through the Wolfswood, that moment years ago when he had first beheld the beauty of Winterfell from a distance, not realizing it would one day be his seat of power. Laughter and shared experiences bound the group in a way that official oaths alone never could. After a little over a fortnight, they crested a hill and saw King's Landing spread out before them. The city looked different now than it had in the days following Daenerys' destruction. Smoke no longer darkened the sky, and from this vantage they could see the spires and domes partially restored. The Red Keep silhouette was less imposing than it had once been. Some of its towers never fully rebuilt, but scaffolding clung to its walls like a stubborn vine, evidence of ongoing efforts to reshape the seat of power. Jon wondered if it would ever truly lose the ghosts of its past. They entered the city through the King's Gate, where the Gold Cloaks, restructured and placed under command of a principled captain named Alson Bywater. The streets bustled with carts and foot traffic. Vendors hawked fresh produce from the Reach, fish from Blackwater Bay, and the usual mix of small trinkets, wineskins, and questionable potions. People moved aside to make room for the king's party, but they did not cower or flee. A few even cheered. Jon saw something in their faces he hadn't seen much before: cautious hope. The royal procession wound its way to the Red Keep. Within the castle courtyard, workers toiled on scaffolding, hammering and lifting cut stones. Stable hands rushed forward to take the horses. Lord Davos Seaworth emerged from within, a quill in one hand and a sheaf of parchment in the other. His face brightened upon seeing Jon. "Your Grace," Davos greeted, offering a respectful bow. "You look well. The journey back was kind, I hope." "More or less," Jon said with a small smile. "Any news?" Davos sighed, gesturing to the parchments. "Always news." A dispatch arrived from Storm's End. "Gendry's dealing with a local squabble among lesser lords who doubt his claim. I've also heard from the north. Sansa's worried about a possible incursion of hill tribes near the eastern edges of the Gift, though it might just be rumors. And there's a letter from the Citadel, addressing something to do with translations of Valyrian texts. Samwell Tarly sent it, so I suspect it might be important." "Ah, yeah." Jon dismounted, passing his reins to a stable hand. "Let's discuss all this in the council chamber." Before heading inside, Jon paused to oversee the dismounting of his party. Tyrion hopped down with practiced ease, though he winced slightly upon landing. Missandei dismounted gracefully, her face already drawn with the seriousness of state matters. One of the young scribes rushed to meet them, carrying a neat stack of parchment. Jon realized how quickly the responsibilities of kingship resumed, as if the festival at Harrenhal had been only a brief dream. He inhaled the warm air of King's Landing, tinted with the smell of fish from the harbor, before following Davos into the castle. The council chamber had been partially refurbished. Once a place of betrayal and cunning whispers, it was now airy and filled with natural light from tall windows, installed where walls had been rebuilt. A round table occupied the center of the room, a deliberate choice to avoid the impression of a head seat. This was where Jon's small council, or perhaps it should be called the Broad Council, given that it drew members from every kingdom, convened to shape the realm's fate. Jon took his seat. Tyrion settled to his right, Davos across from him. Missandei placed herself close to the annotated map pinned on a wall, while Lord Royce of the Vale, acting as Master of War, arrived shortly afterward, still dusty from a journey of his own. A scattering of clerks and scribes set up in the corners, ready to record every detail. The murmur of the city outside drifted through open windows, reminding them that life continued beyond their discussions. Davos cleared his throat and began. "As I mentioned, the Stormlands have a bit of trouble. Gendry has largely pacified the region, but some of the older lords still resent a bastard on the seat of Storm's End, even if he's been legitimized. They're testing him, refusing small taxes, ignoring requests for knights in joint operations. Gendry is asking for your counsel and, possibly, for the presence of a royal envoy to confirm his authority." "Nay." Jon leaned forward. "Which lords are these?" Davos scanned his notes. "Primarily House Whitehead and House Trant. There are also rumors that one of the younger Baratheon cousins is stirring trouble, claiming a more direct line. It's not strictly true. This cousin's lineage is tenuous at best. But some Stormland warriors have rallied behind the Baratheon name, seeing it as a rallying point." "Nah. Right." Tyrion tapped his fingers on the table. "Typical. Name politics. How do we handle it?" Jon exhaled. "We can't appear heavy-handed. Gendry needs to prove his legitimacy not by the sword alone but through governance. At the same time, we can't let open dissent fester." Davos nodded. "I suggest dispatching an envoy, someone respected, with enough authority to underscore the king's backing, yet not so intimidating that it appears we're strong-arming them." Tyrion caught Jon's glance. "I'll go if you wish, but perhaps Sir Brienne of Tarth would be even better. She's a respected figure in the Stormlands, and her loyalty is unimpeachable. Many knights there still admire her feats in the War of the Five Kings." Jon considered it. "Yes, Brienne could serve that purpose well. Send a raven to her. If she agrees, she'll travel to Storm's End and reinforce Gendry's standing." "No." Davos made a note of it. "I'll see it done, Your Grace." Next, they moved on to the northern concerns. Jon listened attentively as Davos read out Sansa's letter describing the hill tribe's strange movements near the Gift. The free folk under Tormund's leadership had settled in parts of the Gift and beyond, forging a new life after the wall's symbolic fall. Tormund was supposed to keep the area stable in cooperation with local northern lords. But Sansa's message suggested that isolated skirmishes had occurred. Farmers' herds were turning up missing, and a few outlying villages had been abandoned. Could it be raiders from beyond the far north? Tyrion asked. Jon shook his head. Hard to say. Many free folk remain scattered, and not all are under Tormund's sway. Some might have returned to old ways, especially if resources are scarce. Or it might be rogue hill tribes from the mountains near the Vale border. The north is vast, and we still haven't fully accounted for every group displaced during the wars. Royce, arms folded, spoke up. We can assemble a scouting force from the Vale to assist the north if Sansa wishes. Our knights are adept in mountainous terrain. Jon thought about it. I'll write to Sansa and ask if she needs assistance. For now, I trust her judgment. The North's men know their land best. If she requests reinforcements, we'll consider sending a contingent from the Vale, or even from the Crown's forces. Missandei stepped forward. There's also the letter from Samwell Tarly at the Citadel. He mentions a discovery in a newly unearthed section of the library. Old volumes detailing the secrets of Valyrian steel, and intriguingly references to a circle of sorcerers who once served the Targaryens. Sam says there might be mention of hidden caches of dragonglass in places previously unknown. Jon rubbed his jaw. Dragonglass was key in fighting the others. We should investigate. I'll have Sam's letter read in full, then respond. If there are hidden caches that could strengthen our resources, it's worth exploring. Even if we don't need them now, it's better to know. They continued through a litany of other matters. Adjustments to trade routes, the progress of building new roads, a potential alliance with the Summer Isles, the slow but steady integration of Dorne into the Realm's Council. By the time the session ended, the sun hung low in the sky, painting the city in ochre. Jon stood, stretched stiff limbs, and realized that being king meant wrestling with the details as much as standing for grand gestures. Leaving the council chamber, he went to his private quarters, still modest, for he'd refused to expand them into the lavish king's apartments of old. The window overlooked what had once been the expansive outer ward, now renovated into gardens and training yards. He could see workers heading home for the day, their silhouettes etched against the fiery sky. The quiet hum of King's Landing replaced the staccato bustle of midday. He felt a momentary sense of calm. That night he penned letters. One to Gendry, offering support and explaining the envoy plan with Brienne of Tarth. Another to Sansa, conveying his concern and readiness to help. A third to Sam, requesting more details on the discovered texts. He worked by candlelight until his eyes burned, then finally set the quill aside. Sleep was restless again. Dreams of the Wall returned, interspersed with images of Drogon roaring over black seas. He woke more than once, rolling to one side to soothe the knot in his shoulder. At dawn he forced himself up and ventured into the courtyard, where he usually practiced with the sword to clear his head. He found Sir Myra Stone already there, running drills. She greeted him with a salute, and they sparred quietly, steel ringing in the early morning light. Ghost watched from a patch of grass, unbothered. Jon had never been the realm's greatest swordsman. He left that distinction to the likes of Sir Brienne or others, but the discipline steadied his mind. Afterward, as he toweled sweat from his face, Tyrion approached carrying a piece of parchment. We just received a raven, Your Grace, from Dorne. Jon motioned for Tyrion to continue. Tyrion read aloud. Prince Cord Uller requests an audience, here in King's Landing, to discuss certain concerns of independence that have arisen among some of the Dornish nobles. He says it would be beneficial to speak face to face, as letters might not convey the full gravity of the situation. Jon frowned. We have treaties ensuring Dorne's rights as a semi-autonomous region. Are they still unsatisfied? Dornish pride is a delicate flower, Tyrion quipped, but his tone was thoughtful. They've historically prized their separate culture. Perhaps some resent the notion that they must adhere to realm-wide laws regarding trade or taxes, even if those laws are meant to benefit everyone. Jon nodded. Then we'll meet with him. The last thing we want is Dorne seceding or stirring rebellion. Schedule a meeting. I'll hear him out. That afternoon, Prince Cord Uller arrived in King's Landing with a small entourage of Dornish guards in flowing robes and spears, tipped with shining steel. They were met in the courtyard with diplomatic courtesy. Jon greeted them in the throne room, which was still being repaired but had enough space for a formal reception. The Iron Throne remained in its half-melted state, a silent reminder of Daenerys' final rampage. Jon did not sit upon it, preferring instead a wooden seat on a raised dais. The symbolism was not lost on the Dornish party. Prince Cord was a wiry man, with sun-bronzed skin and keen black eyes that missed nothing. He wore gold-embroidered robes in vivid red and orange, and he carried himself with the cool self-assurance of someone who knew exactly where he stood in the world. Bowing with measured formality, he introduced himself and his party. Jon returned the courtesy, then gestured for everyone to be seated at a long table set up in the hall. "I appreciate your coming," Jon began, keeping his tone cordial but direct. "Dorne is a valued part of this realm. I understand you have concerns." Cord pressed his fingertips together. "Yes, Your Grace. We in Dorne understand the benefits of unity, especially after the turmoil of recent years. But many of my fellow lords feel that certain trade tariffs imposed on Dornish goods, particularly wines and spices, do not reflect the unique challenges of our region. Additionally, there is talk about the Crown's oversight on matters of local justice. Dorne has its own legal customs, and some worry that we're being asked to conform to laws that do not respect our traditions." "No." Jon listened carefully. Tyrion, seated to his right, scribbled notes. Missandei, on his left, watched with her usual poised attentiveness. "We've aimed to ensure that each region's customs are preserved," Jon said. "The Council has repeatedly affirmed that local governance should remain intact. If certain Crown officials are overstepping, I'll remedy that. As for tariffs, I'm willing to discuss adjusting them if we can agree on a framework that benefits both Dorne and the rest of Westeros fairly." Cord's eyes flickered with interest. "Fair trade is all we ask. And as for local justice, might we formalize a clause stating that Dornish lords can preside over cases in Dorne without the threat of external intervention, unless it violates some broad principle or endangers the realm at large?" "Nay. Pound." Jon considered. "That seems reasonable. We'll need to draft the language carefully, ensuring it doesn't create loopholes for more severe matters like treason or cross-regional crimes, but I'm open to it." They spent the afternoon hammering out preliminary accords, the atmosphere surprisingly amicable. Cord proved pragmatic, and Jon recognized that Dorne's demands stemmed less from malice and more from pride and a desire for self-determination. By the time they concluded, they had the framework for a revised treaty that would both reaffirm Dorne's rights and ensure the Crown's overarching authority in dire matters. They signed a preliminary agreement with the plan to finalize it at a broader session of the Council. Afterward, Jon invited Cord and his guards to share a meal in the refurbished banquet hall. The fare was a blend of Dornish and Crownland dishes, spiced meats, fresh fish, and honeyed wines. Conversations turned lighter, though Jon remained vigilant. Sometimes friendship forged through mutual respect was more durable than one forced by conquest. He hoped this would further weave Dorne into the tapestry of unity. That night, though exhausted, Jon took a moment to reflect by the keep's courtyard. Ghost padded beside him, the direwolf's ears pricking at the slightest sound. The sky was clear, stars shimmering over a city in the midst of rebuilding. Jon thought of how this might have been impossible a few years ago. A Targaryen Stark, crowned king, sitting with a Prince of Dorne to peacefully settle differences. The realm he was shaping defied the old ways of domination. He only hoped that the next crisis would also be met with reason instead of swords. Days turned to weeks. Raven after raven arrived, bearing both tidings of progress and warnings of discontent. Each sunrise found Jon and his council poring over maps, letters, and reports. Brienne of Tarth departed for Storm's End, traveling with a small retinue. Sansa wrote to confirm she had the Hill Tribe incidents under observation. For now, she saw no need for external forces, though she promised to keep Jon informed. From the Citadel, Sam sent more detailed notes about the discovered texts, some referencing hidden strongholds of Valyrian knowledge, others describing long-lost forging techniques for weapons. Jon felt a pang of unease. Such lore might be a double-edged sword. But knowledge, he reminded himself, was rarely the true danger. The danger lay in how people used it. One bright morning, a new visitor arrived at the Red Keep, Yara Greyjoy. She sailed up the Blackwater with half a dozen Ironborn ships, their black sails a stark silhouette against the water. Yara herself strode into the castle gates with confidence, clad in scaled leathers and armed with a short sword at her hip. Jon greeted her in the courtyard. "Long time," she said brusquely, clasping his forearm in greeting. "You look older, Snow." Jon gave her a thin smile. "Ruling can do that." She snorted. "I've had my share of that, though on a smaller scale. The Iron Islands remain difficult. But I come with a proposition." "No." He led her inside, offering her a seat at the council table. Tyrion arrived, pen at the ready. Yara wasted no time. "I want the crown to back my plan for building new dockyards on the Iron Islands. The location is prime for certain trade routes heading west, and we could handle shipping to and from the Sunset Sea. Bring in raw materials from the Westerlands or the north, have it processed and shipped out. We Ironborn know the seas. It'd benefit the realm to have a major port there, safer and more reliable than some of the lesser harbors along the coast." Nadiawa. Jon listened. "And what do you want in return?" Yara's gray eyes gleamed. "I won't lie. My people want prosperity, and they want it on their terms. They're no fans of kneeling. But if the crown invests in these dockyards, we'll share the profits and abide by any realm-wide regulations on tariffs. It'd be a legitimate enterprise, none of the old raiding nonsense. But we'll also want an agreement that the Iron Islands can field their ships in times of conflict as we see fit, so long as we don't break the realm's laws. Essentially, we don't want to be micromanaged by lords who think they know better." "Nan," Tyrion interjected. "Such an arrangement could be extremely profitable. The Iron Islands would become a crucial maritime hub, but we'll need guarantees that this doesn't turn into a pirate haven." Yara shrugged. "The days of piracy are behind us, mostly. We've cracked down hard on the rogue captains who wouldn't fall in line. But I won't pretend the Ironborn are saints. We're a rough breed. Yet if you give them a reason to invest in this new order, an honest way to earn gold, most will keep the peace." "Nay." Jon saw the sense in it. The realm needed a strong western port to complement King's Landing and Lannisport. The Ironborn had proven themselves in the war against the dead and in the subsequent battles. Yara had shown her dedication to forging a new path for her people. "Let's draft the terms," he said simply. Within hours, they had hammered out a preliminary agreement. The crown would allocate funds and resources, working with Yara to construct improved shipyards on the largest of the Iron Islands, Pike included. In return, the Iron Islands agreed to realm-wide shipping regulations, fair taxation of imports and exports, and a pledge to police their waters against pirates. It wasn't a simple arrangement. Both sides would need to keep a close watch, but it had the potential to transform the economy of Westeros yet again. When the meeting concluded, Yara clapped Jon on the shoulder. "You're not such a bad king," she said with a wry grin. "Better than that Mad Queen, at least." Jon only nodded, remembering Daenerys all too well, though he kept his silence. As Yara exited, Tyrion turned to Jon. "You keep forging these pacts. Eventually, the realm might be too prosperous to want war." Jon allowed a small, tired smile. "That's the idea." Evening came, and Jon found himself alone on a gallery overlooking the city. Flames from torchlit streets flickered below, like thousands of tiny lanterns bobbing in an unseen tide. Night breezes carried the faint brine of the bay. He considered how the shape of the realm kept changing. Dorn on better terms, Stormland stabilized under Gendry, the Iron Islands turning into a trade power. Each new success in forging peace felt like an incremental victory against the ghosts of conquest that had defined the Targaryen legacy. Yet as these thoughts consoled him, a messenger approached, breathless. "Your Grace, an urgent raven from House Royce in the Vale. It concerns the Eyrie." Jon took the scroll, broke the seal, and read. His brow furrowed. It seemed that a band of mercenaries, possibly remnants of the Golden Company or other sellswords, had tried to infiltrate the Vale. They had attacked travelers on mountain passes, leaving half a dozen dead. Lord Royce reported that they carried a strange banner, a golden dragon skull on a field of black. This symbol was unfamiliar, but it reeked of some Targaryen pretender or a twisted homage to House Blackfire from centuries past. Jon's heart sank. The letter ended by warning that the mercenaries claimed they had come to take back what was stolen from the rightful heirs. He glanced at the missive's final lines. It suggested these bandits or mercenaries were well armed and well trained, not just common brigands. A cold chill settled in Jon's gut. For all their progress, new threats always surfaced. He summoned Tyrion, Davos, and Royce to the council chamber, reading the letter aloud. Tyrion's face darkened. A golden dragon's skull on black, reminiscent of the Blackfires, though we haven't heard of that line in generations. Could this be some new pretender capitalizing on Targaryen heritage? Royce, who had come to King's Landing just days earlier, nodded grimly. The Val's mountains are treacherous. If these mercenaries hole up there, they could harass trade routes and terrorize villages for months before we flush them out. We'll need a coordinated response. Jon handed the letter to Davos. Prepare a missive to the Vale's lords, instructing them to form a united front. I'll dispatch some of the crown's forces to assist. We won't let a band of sellswords sow chaos. Tyrion's gaze flicked to Jon. You realize what this might mean. If someone is rallying behind a golden dragon, they might be building a narrative around your own Targaryen claim, implying you're not the rightful one, or that there's another line with an older claim. Wow. Jon set his jaw. He had dealt with rumors of Aegon Targaryen pretenders before, though ironically, he himself was the true Aegon Targaryen by birth. Whoever they are, they're murderers. We'll address it swiftly. The next day, detachments of knights and archers prepared to march or sail north to Gulltown, then move into the Vale. Jon considered leading them himself, but Tyrion and Davos advised against it. Your presence is better here, Davos counseled. Send one of your most trusted commanders. Meanwhile, remain where you can address any other crises that arise. Reluctantly, Jon agreed. He appointed Sir Myra Stone, the Vale-born member of his Kingsguard, to lead the expedition. She knew the region well. Along with her went Sir Bronston of the Reach, forging a symbol of inter-kingdom cooperation. While they mobilized, ravens flew to the Eyrie, calling the Vale Lords to action. The plan was simple. Corner the mercenaries in the mountainous passes, force them to surrender or destroy them if they resisted. Jon continued his daily duties, but his thoughts kept drifting to the Vale. Small glimpses of something more sinister nagged at him. The memory of the Night King's threats surfaced unbidden. How no one had believed in the undead until it was almost too late. Now, with the living, cunning, overshadowed raw power, could a cunning enemy exploit old Targaryen myths to tear the realm apart from within? Even as this tension brewed, Sam's new missives from the Citadel arrived. Jon opened them late one night in his study, the candle gutters throwing unsteady shadows on the walls. Sam wrote that further study of the uncovered scrolls suggested there were indeed old Valyrian outposts in places unknown. Even a rumor that one might lie near the Shivering Sea, far to the northeast of the Vale. The text also contained references to a secret society of magesmiths who had pledged fealty to House Targaryen in ages past, forging special amulets rumored to control lesser dragons. Most of it sounded like legend, yet in a world where ice zombies and dragons existed, Jon knew better than to dismiss old tales outright. A knock on the door interrupted his reading. Missandei stepped in, her expression troubled. Your Grace, there's a visitor here to see you, an envoy from Braavos. Jon arched an eyebrow. Braavos had always been a distant, somewhat aloof city-state, though it did business with Westeros. At this hour? She inclined her head. He insists it's urgent. A merchant prince of the Sea Lord's court, apparently. Jon rubbed his eyes and stood. Very well. Show him in. Soon, a tall, slender man with olive skin and a pointed beard entered, wearing a cloak embroidered with the Braavosi sigil, a Titan helmet. He introduced himself as Matthias Inaro, an envoy on behalf of the Sea Lord. He bowed with practiced grace and proceeded to speak in careful common tongue, each word precise. Your Grace, I come bearing tidings of a trade matter that could benefit both Braavos and Westeros, but I also carry a warning. He pulled a sealed letter from his vest. The Sea Lord has received word that certain mercenary companies, once loyal to the Golden Company, have broken away and are seeking new patrons. They roam Essos, and Rome has placed some near the Narrow Sea. Our agents suggest they may be the same who fly a golden dragon banner. Jon's gaze sharpened. The same group troubling the Vale. Matthias nodded solemnly. Likely so. The Sea Lord wishes to maintain peace in the Narrow Sea, as conflict disrupts trade. He offers a proposition. If your forces move against these mercenaries, Braavos will assist by denying them any port or financial services. We will also provide intelligence on their movements if you, in turn, guarantee favorable trade tariffs for Braavosi merchants in Westeros. Jon considered. Tyrion, who had quietly joined them, met Jon's eyes. If Braavos is offering to clamp down on these sellswords, that's a boon, Tyrion noted. We'd do well to secure it. Matthias placed the sealed letter on the desk. The finer details are all here, Your Grace. Jon broke the seal and skimmed the contents. Indeed, the Sea Lord offered cooperation in exchange for certain trade privileges, lower tariffs, guaranteed docking rights, and swift resolution of any Braavosi trade disputes in Westeros. It was a business deal, not a philanthropic gesture, but one that could help starve the mercenaries of coin. And coin was their lifeblood. Jon nodded. I'll accept the Sea Lord's offer in principle, subject to a few clarifications. We'll craft a formal treaty. In the meantime, let him know we appreciate Braavos' friendship in securing the seas. Matthias smiled politely. Braavos and Westeros share mutual interests in stability. The Sea Lord will be pleased to hear this. Missandei took him aside to begin drafting the official documents. Tyrion gave Jon a nod of approval. One crisis at a time. If Braavos stands with us, these sellswords have fewer places to hide or to gather funds. Still, Jon's unease did not vanish. Every new alliance he forged reminded him how delicate the realm's balance was. A single spark of discord could unravel everything. Over the following days, more ravens trickled in from the Vale. Sir Myra Stone and Sir Bronston had clashed with the mercenaries in a narrow canyon. Though the Crown's forces were victorious in the initial skirmish, the bandits melted away into the mountains, regrouping. A second battle left half a dozen knights dead, and the mercenaries still at large. At last, a sealed dispatch arrived one dawn, its edges singed. Evidence it had traveled through hazardous territory. Jon read it in private and felt his throat tighten at the contents. The mercenaries were being led by a man who called himself Orien Blackfire, claiming descent from the Blackfire line that had once rebelled against the Targaryens generations ago. He was rumored to wield a sword of dark steel, possibly Valyrian, and had begun calling for loyalists to rise against the false Targaryen, who defiles the throne. Jon set the letter down and stared at the battered desk in silence. So here it was, a pretender who wanted to sow dissent by reviving the old enmities of House Blackfire. Even though centuries had passed since the last Blackfire rebellion, the name still carried an aura of danger. If Orien Blackfire found enough discontented lords or ex-soldiers to rally behind him, the realm could face another civil war. All it would take was a spark in the right place. He summoned the council and read the dispatch aloud. Tyrion sank into his seat, grimacing. Davos rubbed his forehead. Royce frowned, lips pressed in a tight line. Missandei's eyes flicked with concern. None spoke for a moment, the weight of history pressing down. Then Tyrion cleared his throat. House Blackfire was a cadet branch of House Targaryen founded by Daemon Blackfire, a bastard who was legitimized centuries ago. Tyrion recounted. They launched multiple rebellions before being quashed, but apparently some seeds remain, or at least someone is claiming that lineage. Jon inhaled slowly. He's calling for loyalists. We can't let that message spread unchallenged. He's also well armed and has a band of trained sellswords. The Vale is bearing the brunt now, but if he gains traction, he might move elsewhere. Lord Royce rose. We'll intensify our efforts. I request additional support from other kingdoms, so we can corner him in the mountains and end this threat before it grows. Jon nodded firmly. You'll have it. Within days, the realm shifted into a wartime footing, though on a smaller scale than the grand wars of the past. Reinforcements from the north, the Riverlands, and the Crownlands marched for the Vale, gathering at strategic strongholds. The plan was to tighten a net around the mountainous region where Orien Blackfire was rumored to be entrenched. Jon coordinated closely with each lord, ensuring supply lines remained intact. While these preparations went on, an undercurrent of rumors seeped through the capital. Whispers circulated about another Targaryen with a stronger claim than Jon, or that Daenerys' death was unjust, or that the dragons themselves demanded vengeance. Most were baseless or spurred by old grudges, but combined, they began to tarnish the fragile trust people had in the new monarchy. Tyrion's informants reported that gold was changing hands in taverns, paying for subversive talk to spread. It seemed Orien Blackfire had sponsors even in King's Landing. In an effort to quell disinformation, Jon made a public address in the city's main square. Surrounded by the gold cloaks and his Kingsguard, he spoke plainly to the gathered crowd. He reminded them that the realm had suffered enough wars and that no one claiming to be the true dragon had any rightful cause to spill more blood. He told them of the good that unity had brought: reopened trade, lowered taxes, stable harvests. He asked them to trust in the crown's vigilance against pretenders and mercenaries who wished only to profit from chaos. The crowd responded with lukewarm applause and some scattered cheers. Many seemed more concerned with daily survival than with who wielded the crown, as long as the city's grain stores stayed full and the roads remained open. Still, Jon sensed a flicker of unease in the sea of faces. The memory of Daenerys' destructive wrath lingered. The Targaryen name, even with Stark ties, carried both awe and dread. The next few weeks saw the realm's armies converge on the Vale. Ravens brought reports of skirmishes in high mountain passes, each fight proving difficult as the mercenaries used the terrain to their advantage. Orien Blackfire's men had grown from a mere band to a small army, bolstered by disaffected knights, sellswords, and adventurers who found a lure in the idea of restoring a purer Targaryen line. They wore black surcoats trimmed with gold, some bearing the stylized dragon skull device. They also spread word that Orien had discovered an artifact, a black sword he called the Nightfire Blade, claiming it was forged for his ancestor Daemon. Whether it was truly Valyrian steel, none could confirm, but the rumors alone were enough to lend him a mystique. Despite these challenges, the realm's forces under Lord Royce's overall command gradually tightened their grip. They established blockades on mountain trails and patrolled valleys relentlessly. Winter approached and supplies for the mercenaries would dwindle if they remained trapped. It was slow, grueling work. In King's Landing, Jon rose each day to news from the front. Tyrion managed logistics, ensuring wagons of food and weapons reached the loyal armies. Davos consulted on naval routes, in case the mercenaries tried to escape by sea. Missandei dealt with a spike in foreign envoys worried about potential disruptions to trade. Jon felt the burden like a constant weight pressing on his chest. He knew that if Orien Blackfire somehow slipped the net or made a devastating strike, the realm's unity could fracture overnight. Finally, a decisive moment came when Sir Myra Stone sent word that Orien had been spotted in a narrow gorge near the Giant's Lance, a towering peak that overshadowed the Eyrie. The local lords closed in and a pitched battle ensued. For 3 days, the fighting raged in rocky defiles where cavalry was nearly useless. Archers and foot soldiers fought at close quarters. Casualties mounted on both sides. On the third night, a snowstorm blew in unexpectedly, blanketing the mountains in white. In the chaos, Orien and his inner circle managed to vanish again, leaving behind bodies and shattered shields. News of the near capture at least proved that Orien was flesh and blood, not a phantom. But his escape only heightened the tension. Jon read the battle reports in the Red Keep with clenched teeth. "He can't elude us forever," he murmured to Tyrion. "He might try to flee the Vale entirely," Tyrion said. "We should consider the possibility he'll turn up in the Riverlands or the Westerlands next." Jon exhaled. "Then we must plan for that. Strengthen the border patrols, especially near the passes leading west." And so it went. Winter's first snows dusted the higher altitudes, and the nights turned longer. Morale among the royal armies dipped as the pursuit dragged on. Word trickled in that Orien had a bounty on Jon's head, promising a fortune to any who brought him proof of the king's demise. That alone indicated a desperation for some grand strike. In the midst of this turmoil, a raven arrived from the citadel. Sam's neat script asked for an audience in King's Landing. He wrote that he'd uncovered something urgent about the magical legacies associated with House Targaryen, which might tie directly to Orien Blackfire's claim. Jon wasted no time in summoning Sam to appear. Within days, Sam arrived by carriage, stepping out at the Red Keep with a mixture of relief and apprehension. He was greeted warmly, though Jon could see the tension in Sam's eyes. They had a swift reunion in the council chamber, where Sam spread out old parchments and carefully restored scrolls. "Your Grace," Sam began, still seeming odd to Jon's ears. He remembered when they were just 2 brothers of the Night's Watch. "In these texts I found references to an order of sorcerers loyal to House Targaryen, centuries ago. They practiced forbidden arts, rumored to strengthen the bond between Valyrian steel and its wielder. One name appears repeatedly: the Order of the Ebony Flame. It was believed they could create or empower certain swords to carry the essence of Targaryen blood. Nynaeve. Tyrion narrowed his eyes. Sounds like the stuff of legends or nightmares. Sam nodded. It does. But these scrolls also say that if a blade was awakened through certain rites, it might glow with a dark aura, or even hiss with each swing. The exact details are unclear, but the sword's name, Nightfire, does appear in some fragments. I cross-referenced it with genealogical records of the Blackfire line. Daemon Blackfire famously wielded the Targaryen ancestral blade, Blackfire, but there's mention that one of his sons dabbled in these darker arts, forging a twisted counterpart called Nightfire. Now they. Jon felt a chill. So if Aurion Blackfire truly has that sword, or something like it, he might be trying to legitimize himself with ancient lore. Sam swallowed, looking anxious. Yes. And there's more. The texts hint that to awaken the sword's fullest power, one might need the blood of a true Targaryen. Nah. The council chamber went silent. Jon's stomach twisted. You think he aims to capture me for that purpose? Or at least spill your blood upon his blade? Sam said quietly. It's all very cryptic, but it warns of a ritual that merges Targaryen blood with the sword to seal a bond of kingship. Tyrion tapped his quill anxiously. If Aurion believes this, he may fixate on confronting Jon directly, either for a symbolic victory or some twisted ritual. Jon closed his eyes, remembering how blood and prophecy had shaped so many events in his life, from the disclosure of his parentage to Daenerys' tragic descent. We must ensure he never gets the chance, Jon said softly. In the weeks that followed, the pursuit became personal. Jon coordinated a plan with Lord Royce to systematically sweep the Vale's mountains. He dispatched scouts far to the west, in case Aurion tried to slip through the mountains of the moon. Davos arranged for ships to patrol the coastline. Tension thrummed through King's Landing as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for the final outcome of this chase. Then, late one night, an exhausted rider arrived at the Red Keep, escorted by gold cloaks. He stumbled into the council chamber, cloak torn and face streaked with mud and dried blood. I carry a message for the king, he gasped. Tyrion offered the man water while Jon urged him to speak. The messenger's voice trembled. We found Aurion Blackfire's camp near the high road to the Eyrie. Cornered them, but they set a trap. Many of our men fell. Sir Myra Stone was captured. He swallowed hard. Aurion himself sent me to deliver a challenge. He demands the king face him, alone, at the base of the Giant's Lance in 3 days' time. Or Sir Myra dies. He threatened. Drain her blood as a sacrifice. Jon's anger flared hot and sudden. He looked to Tyrion and Davos. We can't simply let him murder Myra. She's fought valiantly for us. Davos spoke in a low tone. We could mount a rescue, but it could be a trap. You might anticipate an ambush. Tyrion's features were grim. He wants you, Jon. He wants the Targaryen blood. Nine shells. Jon's mind raced. He thought of Sir Myra Stone, a loyal knight, native of the Vale, who had served him faithfully. We can't abandon her, and if I ignore this challenge, it will seem like the crown is afraid. That could embolden Aurion's supporters. Davos grasped Jon's shoulder, voice dropping to a whisper. Your Grace, be careful. This is precisely what he wants. Jon nodded slowly. Then we must be cunning. We'll meet him on his terms and appearance only. But we'll plan for every contingency. Nede, Panagdara. Within hours, ravens flew to the loyalist forces in the Vale, instructing them to remain hidden but ready to move on Jon's signal. Tyrion, Davos, Royce, and Sam huddled over maps, strategizing how best to stage a rescue. Jon insisted on going himself. The council objected, but he overruled them. Aurion had demanded the king's presence, and only the king's presence. Any attempt to send a double or come with an obvious army would cost Sir Myra her life. The plan: Jon would arrive with a small escort, appear vulnerable, and then the hidden forces would strike at the right moment. The journey to the Vale was somber. Jon and his carefully chosen guards traveled swiftly by horse, skirting the main roads to avoid detection. Ghost loped alongside, silent as death in the snowy terrain. The cold bit at Jon's cheeks, reminding him of the harsh nights on the wall. Memories of the Great War flickered through his mind, the monstrous hordes of the dead, the savage fights in the frozen wastes. This battle was different, but the threat was no less dire. Sometimes living men, twisted by ambition and fanaticism, could be just as terrifying. They reached the outskirts of the Vale under the cover of darkness, guided by loyal scouts. Lord Royce's men had set up concealed positions along the ridges. Archers hid behind snow-laden boulders. Cavalry stayed out of sight in nearby woods. The next morning, Jon rode alone to the appointed place, a wind-swept clearing at the base of the giant's lance. The land rose sharply behind it, a sheer face of rock partially cloaked in ice. Snow drifted down in intermittent gusts. In the clearing's center stood Orien Blackfire, flanked by a handful of armed mercenaries wearing black and gold. Bound and kneeling at their feet was Sir Myra Stone, blood staining her temple, and her arms tied behind her. Jon guided his horse forward until he was a dozen yards from Orien. Ghost kept pace, growling low. Orien was tall, with silver blonde hair that suggested some Targaryen blood in his veins. Perhaps real, perhaps an affectation. He wore black armor chased with gold, and across his back was slung a sword that gleamed darkly, even in the pale morning light. His eyes shone with a fervor akin to madness. "You came," Orien called, voice echoing off the rocky walls. Jon dismounted slowly, leaving his sword scabbarded at his side. His breath formed clouds in the chill air. "Release her," he said, forcing calm into his tone. Orien smirked. "In time. First, you and I have unfinished business. You wear the Targaryen name, yet the throne was never truly yours. I stand in the lineage of Demon Blackfire, rightful heir to the Conqueror's bloodline." Jon studied Orien, searching for any vestige of reason. "The people don't want another war. They've had enough. Surrender, and we'll grant you mercy." "Nadiad boy." Orien's eyes blazed. "Mercy? You'd have me kneel to a bastard? I hold the sword of King's Nightfire, awakened by the ancient rites of the Ebony Flame. It calls for Targaryen blood, your blood, to seal my reign." Jon spotted Myra trembling in the snow. Her eyes met his briefly, pleading. The mercenaries shifted. Ghost let out a low, menacing growl, fur bristling. Jon raised a hand to signal caution. He steeled himself, knowing that a direct fight was inevitable. "Then let her go," Jon said. "If you want me, you have me." Orien gestured to one of his men, who promptly hauled Myra to her feet and pressed a blade to her throat. "Draw your sword," Orien commanded. "Fight me, Aegon Targaryen. If you win, perhaps you can save your precious knight. If you lose, well, the realm will know who the true dragon is." Jon inhaled sharply, stepping forward to place distance between him and Ghost, so the direwolf wouldn't be in direct range. He drew Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade glinting in the cold light. The mercenaries formed a loose circle. Somewhere on the ridges above, Jon knew archers waited for his signal. But he couldn't risk them firing while Myra was so close to the enemy. He had to handle this carefully. Orien unsheathed Nightfire. The blade was a deep, smoky black, its surface etched with faint crimson lines, as if molten veins ran through it. A chill radiated from it. Or was that Jon's imagination? With a guttural cry, Orien lunged. Jon parried, the clash of Valyrian steel reverberating across the clearing. Sparks flew. Orien pressed the attack with surprising skill and speed, forcing Jon back. Jon shifted on the snowy ground, trying to keep his footing. One slip could be fatal. Strike after strike, the blades rang out. Orien's eyes shone with a deranged fury, and it was all Jon could do to block and counter. Yet Jon had fought the dead, faced Ramsay Bolton's cunning, crossed swords with some of the finest warriors in Westeros. He refused to yield. Gradually he found the rhythm of Orien's attacks. He deflected a high slash, sidestepped a thrust, and riposted with a downward stroke that grazed Orien's shoulder plate. Orien hissed in pain but grinned. "Yes, bleed me. The sword hungers for blood. Yours will be next." "No." Jon pressed the advantage, forcing Orien to give ground. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the mercenaries tighten their grip on Myra, but they did not intervene yet. Ghost prowled at the edge, ready to leap if needed. Another flurry of blows ended with both blades locked near Jean's face, forcing him to stare into Aurien's frenzied gaze. Aurien spat words that sounded foreign, almost like Valyrian incantations. Jean summoned his strength, twisted his wrists, and shoved Aurien's blade aside, slicing across Aurien's gauntlet. Blood spattered the snow. Aurien roared, staggering backward. Then, shockingly, he cut into his own palm with Nightfire, letting crimson drops splatter the blade's length. The sword emitted a faint, eerie hiss that made Jean's skin crawl. "Now the blade is fed," Aurien shouted, and he sprang forward with renewed vigor, strikes coming in faster, heavier arcs. Jean fought to keep up. His arms ached from the force of the collisions. Each clash seemed to send a jolt of unnatural cold up his arms. Aurien battered Jean's guard, forcing him down to one knee. Out of sheer desperation, Jean kicked at Aurien's shin, causing him to stumble. The momentary opening let Jean roll away and regain his stance, gasping for breath. Aurien's men cheered their leader on, while Myra's eyes brimmed with terror. Jean had to end this soon. He locked eyes with Ghost, who bared his teeth. With a subtle hand gesture, Jean signaled the hidden archers on the ridges. But Aurien must have sensed something, for he howled, "Kill the knight!" One of the mercenaries drew his dagger across Myra's arm, drawing blood as she screamed. Ghost sprang. Snarling, the direwolf lunged at the mercenary's throat, forcing him to drop Myra. Chaos erupted. The other mercenaries moved in, brandishing weapons. At that same instant, arrows whistled down from above. Aurien's men scrambled, some skewered before they could react. Jean dashed forward to grab Myra, pulling her away from the fray as Ghost tore into a second mercenary. The circle broke. Aurien, seeing his plan falling apart, rushed Jean again, Nightfire raised high. Jean pushed Myra behind him and met Aurien's strike. The swords clanged, and Nightfire's dark edge carved a gouge into Jean's pauldron. Pain flared. Jean bit back a cry, pivoting to slash at Aurien's flank. Aurien twisted aside, countering with a diagonal slice that Jean barely parried. The duel became a savage dance of steel, both men bloodied and desperate. Above, the hidden forces began to descend. Trumpets sounded, echoing off the crags. The mercenaries still standing fought back, but they were outnumbered. Aurien's eyes darted around, realizing his trap had turned into a death pit for his own men. Jean seized that moment of distraction. He feinted a high strike, then drove Longclaw forward in a thrust to Aurien's midsection. Aurien tried to dodge, but the tip of Longclaw found a gap in his armor. A gasp escaped Aurien's lips, and he staggered, dropping to one knee. Nightfire clattered to the ground, the black blade sizzling in the snow. Aurien glared up at Jean, blood bubbling on his lips. "You can't stop the true line," he rasped. "We are fire." Then the life went out of his eyes. He collapsed, face turning pale against the snow. A hush fell over the clearing, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the growling of Ghost, who stood guard beside Jean. The realm's forces closed in, subduing or killing the last mercenaries. Lord Royce arrived on horseback, scanning the scene. Jean knelt beside Aurien's body, breathing hard. Snowflakes landed in Aurien's open eyes. The sword Nightfire lay inches away, black steel shimmering with a faint malice. Jean exhaled, trying to steady his shaking hands. He felt Sam's warnings echo in his mind. This cursed blade supposedly thrived on Targaryen blood. He had no desire to claim it, nor let it remain in the wrong hands. He stood, ignoring his own aches, and turned to Lord Royce. "Lock that sword away," he ordered. "Bury it deep or melt it down if we must. I don't want it loose in the world." Royce nodded, motioning for a pair of knights to carefully wrap the blade in thick cloth. Myra was wounded but alive. She knelt at Jean's feet, trembling with relief. He helped her up. "You're safe," he murmured. She managed a grateful nod. Then Jean raised his voice so the gathered soldiers could hear. "It's over. Aurien Blackfire is dead. The realm endures." "Nay." A cheer erupted, echoing along the sheer walls of the giant's lance. The men and women who had fought so hard let out a collective sigh of relief. Ghosts tatted over, muzzle stained with the blood of fallen enemies, and Jon stroked his fur, grateful for the dire wolf's unwavering loyalty. In the days that followed, the remnants of Orion's band were rounded up. Many surrendered once they learned their leader had fallen. The Vale began to calm. The threat that had loomed so large melted like snow in the spring sun. Jon oversaw the disposal of Nightfire, personally watching as the cloth-wrapped sword was sealed inside a stone chest, then hidden away in the deepest vault beneath the Eyrie. Some recommended throwing it into the sea, but Jon worried that might allow it to wash ashore somewhere else. At least here he knew where it was, guarded by the Vale's knights and the watchful eyes of Lord Royce. At last, he returned to King's Landing with Myra, Tyrion, and the battered soldiers who had survived. The city greeted them with cautious jubilation, for the rumor mill had already spread word of Orion's defeat. Bells tolled, crowds cheered, and rose petals were scattered in the streets. Jon rode through it all feeling more relief than triumph. Another threat to the realm had passed. Still, he couldn't forget Orion's final words. "We are fire." The idea that more pretenders or zealots might rise in the future was inescapable. But at least for now, the realm could breathe. King's Landing bustled with new life. Merchants and travelers passed under the restored gates, trade flourishing once more. The roads built under Jon's orders allowed caravans from the Reach, the Westerlands, and even distant Dorne to converge. Taverns filled with laughter, and the markets overflowed with produce and goods. Still wearing his traveling leathers, Jon paused at the foot of the Red Keep steps. He saw families reuniting, the laughter of children running through the courtyard. A sense of normalcy, overshadowed by the scars of war, but still cherished. He climbed up to the Great Hall, where Davos and Missandei awaited with new dispatches. There were always new matters, minor rebellions to quell, trade deals to finalize, disputes between lords needing arbitration. Sam lingered by a column, looking visibly relieved when he saw Jon return safe. Tyrion approached, offering a half-smile. "Welcome back, Your Grace. Another threat cast down. Shall we file it under a footnote in the list of rebellious upstarts?" Jon let out a weary chuckle. If only it were that simple. But, yes, it's done. And, Ishi. As the day stretched on, he attended a swift council session to confirm that the Vale had settled. House Royce sent word of cautious celebration, promising a feast in the Eyrie to honor the victory. Jon politely deferred the invitation for now, as he had pressing matters in the capital. The battered soldiers under Myra Stone received commendations for valor. She herself was honored, though she modestly deflected praise, saying she only wished to protect the realm she loved. That evening, Jon stood on a balcony overlooking King's Landing, the sun setting in a blaze of orange across the Blackwater Bay. Ghost lay at his feet. Tyrion and Davos joined him, each with a cup of wine in hand. They offered Jon one, but he refused, content to stand in the crisp air. Davos took a sip and gazed out at the city. "We live in interesting times," he said softly. "But at least we live." Tyrion swirled his cup. "Aye, we do. And Westeros seems to be living too, not just surviving. Perhaps one day, the realm will outgrow its hunger for kings and queens and lay down all these banners." "Nae." Jon said nothing for a moment, contemplating the horizon. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. "If that day ever comes, it'll be because we did our part to build something better. Step by step, one crisis at a time." They stood in companionable silence as twilight deepened, each man lost in thought. For Jon, memories swirled. The old days at Winterfell, the frigid nights on the wall, the impossible battles against the dead. He remembered Daenerys, riding dragons overhead, and the look in her eyes before he ended her life. He thought of the name Targaryen, the burden and legacy it carried. Then he thought of the road behind him, forging alliances, quelling rebellions, striving to prove a kinder path was possible. He turned to his friends. "We've survived the others, mad queens, rebellions, and pretenders. We've built roads, reopened trade, and tried to mend old wounds. It might never be perfect, but we've given the people a chance at peace. That's all I ever wanted." "No." Tyrion raised his cup in a silent toast, his eyes showing a rare sincerity. Davos nodded, respect etched in every line of his weathered face. Somewhere in the city, a bell tolled, marking the passing of another day. Jon listened to it, feeling the pulse of a realm that had begun to hope again. Over the next months, the aftershocks of Orien Blackfire's rebellion slowly subsided. The lords of Westeros found renewed faith in the crown's ability to protect them. Trade treaties with Braavos flourished, ushering in an influx of coin and goods. Yara's dockyards in the Iron Islands progressed, drawing laborers and shipwrights from across the seas. Dorne ratified the new treaty that recognized its traditional rights while maintaining cooperation with the crown. The Stormlands, under Gendry's rule, and reinforced by Brienne's presence, grew more stable. The North continued to rebuild under Sansa's watchful leadership, forging a new identity that balanced its proud independence with realm-wide unity. King's Landing itself transformed further. With each passing season, new structures rose to replace those destroyed by Dragonfire. The city guard, under Captain Bywater, maintained stricter standards against corruption. The small folk found steady work in the docks, markets, and construction sites. They still remembered the terror of past wars, but they began to believe that perhaps their children would know a better life. Jon engaged in the daily grind of governance. Meetings with the council, discussions with foreign envoys, the signing of edicts to ensure fair taxation and distribution of resources. He oversaw the upkeep of roads, the expansion of the city's harbor, and the training of a standing force, loyal to the crown but drawn proportionally from each kingdom, so no single region dominated. He occasionally traveled to other parts of Westeros to settle disputes, stepping into the role of mediator rather than conqueror. Everywhere he went, Ghost accompanied him, a silent symbol of the North that never let him forget his Stark blood. When not consumed by royal duties, Jon tried to find moments of solitude. Sometimes at dusk, he would ride out to the fields near the Roserad, accompanied by a minimal guard. He'd let Ghost race through the tall grass, watch the sunset turn the horizon gold and crimson. In those quiet instants, he recalled the austere beauty of the far north, the bonds he had forged with the free folk, and the memory of what it felt like to be just a man, not a king. He also ensured Myra Stone received proper care and recognition. Her injuries from Orion's camp took time to heal, but she returned to the Kingsguard with renewed dedication. She seldom spoke of her captivity, except to thank Jon for not abandoning her. Jon, for his part, saw in her a reflection of the realm's resilience, wounded but unbroken. Tyrion and Davos remained invaluable. Tyrion navigated the webs of politics with cunning and humor, advising Jon on everything from taxes to foreign relations. Davos managed naval affairs and logistics, forging a disciplined, trustworthy backbone for the crown. Missandei expanded the realm's diplomacy, fostering new ties with cities like Volantis and Pentos. Sam served as a bridge to the Citadel, guiding a wave of educational reforms that established small learning houses in major towns. Slowly, the literacy rate improved, and knowledge began to spread, although progress remained uneven. Brienne wrote to Jon periodically from Storm's End, reporting that Gendry's rule was solidifying. She also hinted that the two were growing closer, though she never stated it plainly. Jon often smiled at the implication that friendship and loyalty might blossom into something more. In Winterfell, Sansa corresponded with regular updates, describing how the North found a cautious equilibrium, forging alliances with certain northern mountain clans and bartering with the free folk for goods. At the free folk for goods. Arya's whereabouts remained unknown, her adventurous spirit leading her to lands beyond Westeros. Some nights Jon would stare at the horizon, wondering if she'd ever return. And so the years slipped by, punctuated by seasons of calm and minor crises. New roads finished construction, linking far-flung corners of the continent. Ports flourished, villages recovered, and the scars of the Great War and Daenerys' destruction faded, though never disappeared. Slowly, the idea took root among the people that perhaps this union, this delicate tapestry of kingdoms bound by respect rather than fear, might hold. Some lords murmured that Jon should remarry or secure an heir. Others whispered that the line of succession remained vague. Jon listened politely but made no decisions. The memory of Daenerys cast a long shadow. He had lost lovers, lost children that might have been, lost pieces of himself along the way. If the realm needed continuity, he had established a system by which a ruler could be chosen by the council if he died without issue. For now, that was enough. He poured his energy into governance, ensuring the realm was stable beyond one man's life. Yet fate was never done testing him. One crisp winter morning, a raven arrived from the far north, beyond Winterfell, from the scattered remnants of the free folk near the old wall. The message was terse and to the point. A new blight had appeared among their crops, and the free folk suspected it was no natural disease. Some whispered of dark magic lingering in the frigid wastes, speaking of curses left behind by the White Walkers. Others told of strange sightings, pale figures glimpsed by moonlight, and odd patterns in the snow. Tormund, never one for superstition, asked for help investigating. Jon felt a shiver of dread. He called a quick council. "We thought the threat of the White Walkers ended with the Night King," he said, voice tight. "But we can't ignore this." Tyrion pursed his lips. "It might be nothing, or it might be some leftover necromancy. In any case, ignoring it would be foolish." Davos suggested sending a small expedition, and Jon agreed. But who would lead it? Jon, king of the realm, had responsibilities that spanned more than just the north. Yet the memory of the White Walkers tugged at him, reminding him of the vow he had once made, to guard the realms of men. That vow still burned in his heart. He decided, after lengthy debate, to go himself. The north had always shaped him. If something haunted it, he owed it to the land and its people to see for himself. The council prepared for his absence. Tyrion and Davos would handle the day-to-day rule. Missandei continued her diplomatic tasks. A small retinue would accompany Jon, including some Northmen and a few knights from other kingdoms to symbolize unity. Ghost, of course, would be at his side. Within a fortnight they set out, riding hard for Winterfell. Sansa greeted them at the gates with a mixture of surprise and concern. "You should have sent word ahead," she chided, though her eyes were warm with affection. "I'd have prepared a proper welcome." "There was no time," Jon said, embracing her. He noticed new lines on her face, the product of her own burdens as Lady of Winterfell. They retreated to the great hall, where a fire roared in the hearth. Over mulled wine, Jon explained the free folk's message. Sansa listened intently, tapping her fingers on the table. After a moment she agreed. "We'll gather scouts and head north to investigate. The snows are thicker this year, but the roads should still be passable." They rested for a night, then continued. Tormund met them near the last hearth, the Umber stronghold. The free folk leader's grin was as wild as ever, though it faded when he described the withering of crops and the odd apparitions. "It ain't like the dead are back," Tormund growled. "But something's off. The animals sense it too. Hares fleeing, foxes howling at strange hours. The nights feel wrong." Jon felt the old dread coil in his stomach. Memories of the White's blue eyes flickered in his mind. He prayed this was just some natural phenomenon or a passing curse. But they had to be sure. With a small band they pressed on, crossing the snow-laden plains and battered forests that lay where the wall once stood. They passed abandoned watchposts that had once been manned by the Night's Watch. The black granite of Castle Black had partially crumbled, though some free folk now used it as shelter. The wind keened across the icy plains, reminding Jon of a ghostly lament. The deeper they traveled, the more signs of decay they found. Patches of land where nothing grew, animals lying dead in circles, as though they'd collapsed from terror. Tormund led them to a ravine where the free folk had reported seeing pale shapes. They found footprints in the snow, human footprints, but elongated, as if made by someone half again as tall as a normal man, or someone wearing strange boots. It was impossible to tell. At night the wind howled, and the temperature plummeted dangerously. They huddled around fires, maintaining a rotating watch. One moonlit night, Jon was awakened by Ghost's low growl. He rose, drawing his cloak around him, and peered out into the darkness. Silhouetted against a distant crest, something moved, tall, gaunt, and utterly silent. Its eyes reflected the moonlight with a faint white glow, different from the ice blue of the White Walkers. When Jon blinked, it vanished as though it had never been there. By dawn, they climbed to the ridge. Fresh snow had erased tracks, but Jon found a single piece of tattered fabric, grayish-white, snagged on a rock. It crumbled to dust when touched. Tormund spat, muttering curses. The men exchanged uneasy glances. No one knew what they faced. They pressed on another day, encountering more withered patches of earth. One of Tormund's scouts, a free folk woman named Ola, led them to a frozen lake. In its center, they found a ghastly sight. Dozens of animal carcasses arranged in a spiral pattern, partly frozen into the ice. It reminded John of the way the White Walkers had once left corpses in twisted symbols. "Gods," he whispered. Tormund's face hardened. "Whatever this is, it ain't friendly." A sense of foreboding told John they had found enough to confirm that some malevolent force lingered. Whether it was a splinter of the White Walker's magic, or a new entity altogether, they were not equipped to confront it here. They needed the realm's resources, the expertise of scholars like Sam, and the vantage of a broader strategy. So, with heavy hearts, they turned back. On the journey south, storms harried them. Biting winds and swirling snow reduced visibility to mere yards. Yet they pressed on. One night a scout vanished, footsteps leading away from camp. They found him half a mile out, dead in the snow, eyes wide with terror. No wound on his body. John felt each new horror weigh on him. This was not the triumphant North he had imagined after the Night King's defeat. Evil had ways of persisting. They finally returned to Winterfell, battered and grim. Sansa saw the haunted look in Jon's eyes and demanded a full account. After hearing it, she summoned Northern lords for an emergency council. Most were unnerved. They had believed the threat beyond the wall ended. Now, new tales of unnatural sightings threatened to plunge them back into fear. Jon urged them to remain calm, to fortify defenses, to keep watch. He promised he would coordinate with King's Landing for additional support and knowledge. "It might be a remnant of the old magic, or something else," he told them. "We must be vigilant. We overcame the Night King by uniting. We'll face this new threat the same way." Some nodded, but others looked uncertain. The realm had finally found a fragile peace. Would it all be undone by another supernatural menace? As he left the council, Jon felt the weight of an old vow in his chest. "I'm the shield that guards the realms of men." The vow didn't disappear when he became king. It only deepened in meaning. He took a day to rest, conferring with Sansa. She promised to keep the North on alert and share any new information. Then Jon prepared to ride back south. He needed Sam's expertise, needed to gather more resources, perhaps even to send word across the sea for help or knowledge from other lands. Tormund, unwilling to let a new horror go unchecked, accompanied him. They departed Winterfell with a subdued atmosphere. Ghost trotted at Jon's side, head low, as if sensing the gloom. Snow fell in swirling gusts, but not enough to block the roads. As they headed for Moat Cailin, Tormund rode up to Jon. "You think we'll be fighting ice demons again, Crow?" Jon glanced at him. "I don't know, but we'll fight whatever comes." Tormund grunted. That we will. This time let's hope we've learned enough not to lose half the realm before we take it serious." Jon's lips curved into a grim smile. "I hope so too." Their journey south was slow but steady, the cold gradually easing. When they finally reached King's Landing, the city was a stark contrast to the frozen north, still chilly but bustling with life. Tyrion and Davos listened in disbelief as Jon recounted the strange sights. Sam, who had remained in the capital to help with administrative tasks, paled upon hearing the accounts of the odd footprints, the swirling patterns of dead animals, and the silent figure on the ridge. "I'll search the archives," Sam promised. "Perhaps there are references to such phenomena from before the Long Night, or from other parts of the world. Meanwhile, we should speak with any red priests we can find. Sometimes they have knowledge of hidden evils." Jon nodded. "Do it. If there's a threat out there, we can't wait for it to grow." Tyrion tapped a finger on the map of Westeros. "If we're dealing with something akin to the White Walkers, we should alert every kingdom, muster resources. But we must be careful. Announcing a new supernatural threat might cause panic, or give cynics reason to claim you're fabricating a crisis." Jon let out a slow breath. Better to risk cynics than to be unprepared. "We'll call a summit of lords. We'll share what we've found so they can ready their defenses, quietly, if possible, to avoid panic." And so the cycle began anew. Messages dispatched, lords summoned, cautionary plans laid. In the corridors of the Red Keep, courtiers whispered about strange northern superstitions, while others recalled the horror of the White Walkers all too well. Yet this time, the realm was not fragmented by war. Jon had the chance to coordinate a united response before catastrophe struck. Days stretched into weeks. Sam pored over tomes, occasionally emerging to report a curious finding, mention of spectral creatures called the Frost Wraiths in some ancient text, or references to pale wanderers that roamed the furthest north before being driven away. None of it was concrete. Tormund grew restless, pacing the castle walls like a caged bear. Tyrion arranged for scouts to sail around the eastern edge of the continent, searching for any sign that these apparitions ventured southward. For now, there was no direct confrontation, but the tension simmered just beneath the surface of the realm's daily life. Even as they braced for this potential threat, Westeros continued. The roads bustled, the harvest was decent despite the chilly season, and trade with Braavos and other free cities expanded. A new sense of cautious optimism emerged. Even if a new danger loomed in the north, the realm was more unified than ever before. Soldiers from Dorne, the Reach, the Westerlands, and beyond volunteered to travel north in case of need, standing shoulder to shoulder with northern warriors. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that the unity Jon had forged might be tested yet again. One dusk, Jon stood atop the Red Keep's highest rampart, looking out over the city. Lights glowed in windows, and the harbor shimmered with reflected lanterns on dark water. Ghost sat by his side. The breeze carried the scent of salt and wood smoke. He recalled standing watch on the wall, staring into the endless white. Now he was a king, and the city below was his to protect. He felt a pang of longing for simpler days. Yet he also knew the realm was stronger now, not just by arms but by the bonds of cooperation. If a new threat came from the north, they would face it as one people, not as scattered foes bickering among themselves. Tyrion joined him, silent for a moment before speaking. "I never pictured myself alive this long," Tyrion said softly, "let alone serving a king who might actually save the world twice." Jon's gaze stayed on the distant horizon. "We haven't saved it yet. We don't even know what we're fighting." Tyrion sighed. "True. But when the White Walkers came, half the realm dismissed them. Now, if you call upon them for help, I suspect you'll see an army of thousands answering, from Dorne to the Wall. That's no small thing." "Na sire." Jon nodded, the corners of his lips lifting. That might be the greatest victory. They lingered there, watching the lights, aware that challenges lay ahead but buoyed by the knowledge that they did not stand alone. Below, in the winding streets of King's Landing, a sense of normalcy flourished. Markets, taverns, the day's toils giving way to nightly rest. On distant roads, travelers journeyed safely across a land that had known too much bloodshed. In every corner of Westeros, from the Iron Islands to the Vale, from the Stormlands to Dorne, people carried on, no longer quite as haunted by the specters of the past. Jon let the evening air fill his lungs, remembering the vow he'd once taken before the old god's weirwood, and the many vows he had taken since. He was a brother of the Night's Watch, a wolf of House Stark, a dragon of House Targaryen, and now a king striving to hold a realm together. The darkness beyond the edges of the known world would always exist, but he had helped forge a shield, a living, breathing realm of disparate kingdoms that, for perhaps the first time in memory, did not hunger for each other's downfall. Standing there, the direwolf at his side, Tyrion's quiet presence behind him, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, felt that tenuous current of hope flicker in his chest. Winter would always come, but together they would be ready. And if the flame of unity and compassion burned bright enough, perhaps it would hold back the cold for generations to come, forging a new story for Westeros, one shaped not solely by dragonfire and conquest, but by the courage to stand side by side in defense of the living.